Ah, Phoenix. This sizzling gem in the Sonoran Desert isn't just another American city. It's more like a giant oven where you can throw a party, as long as you don't forget the ice. Seriously, if you find yourself here in the summer, brace yourself for some serious heat. We're talking about temperatures that regularly pass 100 degrees. And in 2024, Phoenix hit 110 degrees 55 times during the summer, tying the record set just the year before. Now, I get it if you're not a fan of hot weather, but apparently a lot of people love living in a sauna. Phoenix ranks as the 5th largest city in the United States, and it is the capital and most populous city in Arizona, with 1.7 million residents as of 2024. And if we're talking about the metropolitan area, also known as the Valley of the Sun, the population is almost 5 million. Yet, good luck finding someone actually born here. Out of every 4 Phoenix residents, 3 were born somewhere else. Believe it or not, Phoenix wasn't always this bustling, crowded place. It became one. A few decades ago, it was just a sleepy little dot on the map. Back in the 1940s, the population was around 65,000. It wasn't even close to cracking the top 100 list of the largest U.S. cities. Now, at that time, Phoenix was mostly an agricultural hub, and its economy revolved around what they called the 5 C's: cotton, citrus, cattle, climate, and copper. But things really started to change in the 1950s thanks to one life-changing invention. Drumroll please? The air conditioner. Actually, it was the portable version that came out in 1945, created by an American inventor named Robert Sherman. Phoenix residents owe a lot to Robert for making life bearable during scorching summers. Before AC, people in Phoenix would literally move their beds outside and build sleeping porches. They'd protect that kind of outdoorsy space with light curtains or some kind of net to keep the dust and bugs out. Fun. Anyway, the point is that the air conditioner played a big part in making Phoenix an easier place to live. Since the 1940s, this city in Arizona has transformed from a dusty little town into a sprawling urban jungle, and it's still one of the top 10 fastest-growing metro areas in the U.S. The best part is, it looks like that won't change anytime soon, since this 519-square-mile metropolis is surrounded by rolling desert, with plenty of room to keep growing as far as the eye can see. So, who's dropping everything to move to Phoenix? Well, Californians are the city's biggest fans. According to a recent survey, a third of all new renters moving to Phoenix come from Los Angeles. Okay, that survey might not be the most reliable since it only applies to the source's clients, but it does line up with U.S. Census Bureau data from 2019, which says that 70,000 Californians moved to Arizona in the previous year. The connection between Phoenix and LA is so strong that some people even call Phoenix the next LA. You've got to give Phoenix credit for capitalizing on its proximity to Southern California. The city offers lower taxes, fewer regulations, and lower costs of living, which makes it a magnet for businesses, especially in high-tech and service industries. So, in the 90s, Phoenix was considered a non-stop generator of jobs. In the last few years, we've seen the number of jobs only go up, and the unemployment rate has dropped by nearly half, going from 6.3 in January 2014 to 3.4 in the same month in 2024. Now, when it comes to big city problems, you can't avoid talking about traffic. But here's another reason why Phoenix is a dream city. It doesn't even come close to the traffic nightmares you find in places like LA. Estimates show that people in Los Angeles waste about 119 hours a year just sitting in traffic. But in Phoenix, it's more like 61 hours. Huge difference, huh? And let's not even start talking about the money people waste just sitting in traffic. In LA, drivers burn through about $2,440 worth of gas per year. In Phoenix, they waste 25 gallons of fuel, which ends up costing about $952. Yeah, that's still a lot of cash, but compared to LA, come on, that's a steal. Phoenix being okay in terms of traffic might have a lot to do with how the city was designed. Just take a look at a map of Phoenix. You'll notice it looks like someone took a ruler and drew perfectly straight lines for the roads. That's because the city was laid out in a grid system. This setup makes it so much easier to get around, especially compared to cities full of confusing twists, U-turns, and one-way streets. It just simplifies things, whether you're a local or a tourist. Plus, Phoenix has nice wide streets. Most cities have one major road and a bunch of narrow streets that just can't handle heavy traffic. But Phoenix has wide roads everywhere. So, when the freeways get jammed, you can just hop onto a parallel street and still get to work without stressing out too much. When you look at all the job opportunities and the relatively smooth traffic, it's no wonder people are willing to put up with the heat and move to Phoenix. But don't get it twisted, the heat is no joke. It is really, really hot and sunny out there. We're talking about 300 days of sunshine on average, or about 85% daylight hours per year. But once again, Phoenix has made the best of it. And all that constant sunshine has turned Phoenix into one of the top solar energy cities in the country. Now, you may be wondering, a city in the middle of the desert with barely any rain, do they actually have enough water? Well, they do. Phoenix has its water situation pretty well sorted out, thanks to multiple sources. I mean, they don't rely on rain alone, which is a good thing because, desert life. Most of their water comes from way up north and east of the valley, where snow melts off the mountains and flows into giant reservoirs, storing it up for those dry years. But most of Phoenix's water comes from the Salt River Project, which brings water through canals and pipelines from the Salt and Verde rivers. Then there is the Central Arizona Project, which transports water all the way from the Colorado River. They even get a bit of water from underground wells. And Phoenix doesn't want to waste a drop, so they're smart about recycling, reusing treated water to keep parks green, and even recharging their groundwater. Since Phoenix is all about sunny skies nearly every day of the year, it's normal that people can get a little moody when it actually rains. But here's the thing. Phoenix always gets a surprise up its sleeve, even when it comes to bad weather. When it rains in the deserts, locals get treated to this unique earthy smell. It's thanks to the creosote bush, a desert plant that releases an amazing fragrance when the rain hits it. People describe it as the smell of rain, and honestly, it's one of those fresh, clean scents that makes you forget you're in the desert for a second. And if you've never stopped to think about why Phoenix is called Phoenix, well, it's based on that famous legend of the bird that rises from the ashes. Now, after knowing all the special things about this city and its unique ability to turn challenges into advantages, we can say the name couldn't have been better chosen.
What you're viewing is recognized as the most densely populated location to have ever existed. It spans just 6.4 acres, which is equivalent to 13 Starbucks coffee shops located in the Empire State Building. And while a huge coffee shop like this one can host, say, 1,000 guests, this place somehow managed to have around 33,000 people squeezed in. Some estimates suggest that the actual number could have soared to 50,000 at some point. This is Kowloon Walled City. The city is relatively young, settled in 1898, but its history goes back nearly 1,000 years to the Song Dynasty. Originally a modest fortification, it remained largely unchanged until renovations in 1847 added defensive walls, leading to its revival a half-century later. But back then, the area was sparsely populated rather than crowded. To really understand just how packed this area got by the mid-20th century, let's compare it to some others. Take the East Village in New York City, for example. It has a little park at its center, but mostly it's filled with a mix of historic homes and newer apartment buildings. As of 2010, it was home to over 44,000 people, making it way more crowded than the rest of New York City, which is saying a lot, since New York City is the most densely populated city in the US. By most standards, it's pretty busy. But then you look at Kowloon walled city, and it's a whole different ballgame. If all the land there could be split proportionally between the residents, that would be somewhere around 5.5 to 8.5 square feet per person, if we count land only. While science claims people need 200 to 400 square feet at home just to feel good. So, why was everything crammed together like that? Well, it comes down to Kowloon walled city's unique status. It was never officially part of the rest of Hong Kong. What started as a small Chinese military outpost became more significant when a larger fort was built nearby, coinciding with the rise of Canton Harbor. After the fall of the Qing dynasty, this site transformed into a tourist destination, eventually becoming home to around 400 squatters. However, in the 1930s, the Hong Kong authorities intervened, relocating the inhabitants and demolishing the dilapidated structures. The 1940s and 50s were pretty rough times for folks in Kowloon. And while the residents were somewhat accustomed to different countries vying for control over their land, they were definitely caught off guard by natural disasters. In January 1950, a massive fire broke out that wiped over 2,500 huts, leaving almost 3,500 families, which is about 17,000 people without homes. This disaster really underscored the need for better fire safety measures, especially in the squatter areas made mainly of wood. The problem didn't end there. Due to the lack of control from both the Chinese and British authorities, except for a handful of operations conducted by the Hong Kong police, the walled city became a refuge for illegal activities. It was not until a trial in 1959, which took place within the walled city's boundaries, that the Hong Kong government was officially recognized as having jurisdiction there. By that time, however, organized crime groups known as triads had already established dominance over the area. Starting in the 1950s, triad factions such as the 14K and Sun Yee-un took control of all the criminal dens within the walled city. The environment became so dangerous that police would only enter in large numbers. It wasn't until 1973 and 1974 when over 3,500 police operations led to more than 2,500 arrests and the confiscation of illegal produce that the influence of the triads began to diminish. Only a decade later, the local police chief announced that the crime rate in the walled city was now under control. And even though crime dropped, the walled city still became known for having a surprising number of unlicensed doctors and dentists who could work there without fear of getting into trouble. That was a win-win. Many working-class people couldn't afford licensed dentists somewhere in Hong Kong, so they would go to Kowloon to receive affordable health care. You get it now. What can attract people in such a seedy place? Right, it's zero oversight. And zero oversight means that anyone could start their business here, no matter how shady it was. However, there were some totally normal entrepreneurs. For example, noodle makers. Despite all the dangers, the population of the city kept growing. But how can you create more houses if your territory is very limited? Simple. Think vertically, not horizontally. So, local developers started stacking more and more stories, as if those were Lego bricks you could easily add on top of your tower. This led to a crazy population boom, making the city feel like a little world of its own, with over 33,000 people being crammed into 300 buildings on just about 7 acres. By the late 70s and early 80s, the city hit its peak size. But that came with some quirks. However, there were limits on how tall buildings could go. Those could not exceed 13 to 14 stories, and it was because of planes flying into Kai Tak Airport. Yeah, Living close to the airport meant residents had to deal with a lot of noise. Water was provided through 8 municipal pipes, although there were options for wells too. Some streets barely saw any natural light thanks to the way buildings were packed in, and fluorescent lights were the go-to for illumination down below. It was nighttime all the time in there. So, the city buildings were pretty tall, yet the city had merely 2 elevators for its entirety. At the base of various skyscrapers, both shared and private mailboxes were affixed to the walls. Frequently, this left the postman with no choice but to ascend on foot. Even several floors high, the tangled network of paths persisted, intricate passages that wound their way into the city's core through a web of bridges and staircases. But let's say you live in such a place and want to have a walk or just a bit of fresh air. What do? In such cramped conditions, rooftops will serve you 1,000 purposes. They can be a space for physical activities and a kid's playground, but they can also be used as venues for pigeon racing, with residents making their guess concerning which pigeon comes first. And it's illegal for sure. Such rooftops can pose certain risks because of the narrow spaces between the buildings. But locals use them also as landfills. The absence of efficient garbage collection led to some residents to transport their larger waste items up to the roof. Consequently, many rooftops became crowded with abandoned mattresses, damaged furniture, and appliances. Hey, I get the feeling that I'm talking about something that actually exists. Sorry for that, I totally forgot to mention the most important thing. This city ceased its existence back in the 1990s. What happened? Long story short, both Chinese and British authorities grew increasingly weary of the chaos unfolding in the city. Control was difficult, if not impossible. Criminals kept proliferating and the area was in disarray. Consequently, officials from both countries chipped in and allocated approximately $350 million in compensation for the locals, who had been kicked out of that area as the city was demolished. Kowloon exists today, but not as the infamous walled city. It's now an urban area in Hong Kong, which is located in a completely different place. It just has the same name. As for the area that used to be Kowloon, there's now a park known as Kowloon Walled City Park. Architects and thinkers still look back at Kowloon as a prime example of the organic megastructure concept from the 60s, which envisions cities as flexible networks that grow and change with their residents. Almost forgot. If you're looking to catch a glimpse of the real deal, you should watch Crime Story, starring Jackie Chan, as some scenes were filmed there.
According to the United Nations, India became the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America stands in that rating? It's number 3, and America is the 4th largest country in terms of size. It takes up some 6% of Earth's landmass. Plenty of space for 335 million people who live there, right? No need to squeeze them into one region. Well, not quite. The population of the U.S. is distributed pretty unevenly. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It'll run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. Once you input census data and do some math, astounding figures appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live to the west. That's just 1 in 5 Americans. We're talking about large metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. You don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the U.S. at night. The right part is shining pretty bright, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in population? Simply put, history and geography. The East Coast is the place where the U.S. became independent in 1776. These are the original 13 colonies. Soon enough, settlers started spreading westward. One important milestone was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, this region is mostly what we call the Midwest. The area aligns nicely with the Mississippi watershed. Yup, this means plenty of fertile soil ideal for agriculture. But does this automatically mean a spike in population? The demographics of the U.S. reveal that a majority of its citizens live either on the east or the west coast. This leaves a large patch of land in the middle of the country virtually empty. People know it as America's underpopulated belt. The area stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total surface area of this strip of land is 350,000 square miles. That's twice the size of California. One massive piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip accounts for 12% of the contiguous United States. That's the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs north to south through 7 states, but its population makes up only 1% of the total number of people living in the United States. Now, this doesn't mean that the area is completely empty. It's still home to just over 3 million people. That's roughly the population of the island country of Jamaica. But there is room here for many more residents. Let's take the example of Nigeria. Its total land area is slightly bigger than the sparsely inhabited belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a huge 206 million people. This makes it the 7th most populated country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't the American Midwest living up to its potential? Well, time for one last history lesson. I've already mentioned how the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. This doesn't mean that the West was lagging too far behind. Take, for example, the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were incorporated in 1850. That's just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon became incorporated. You get the picture. And then, in 1869, the United States completed building its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was unified. There is no historical reason strong enough to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. So now it's time for some interesting geography. If you look at the physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies in the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the area is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. Well, not really. East of this region, there is a huge patch of the color brown. It's covered by mountains. But not just any mountains. These are the Rockies. The range is around 76 million years old. It has several peaks over 14,000 feet. And most of the Rockies are national parks, a vast nature reserve. But most importantly, the range plays a vital role in the region's climate. Ever heard of the rain shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. Then they travel east, where they meet the Rockies. Now the air has to go up over the mountains. This is where it cools down and condenses. The final result? A lot of rain and snow for the people living on or west of the range. And just a few drops east of it. When air from the Pacific finally reaches the Great Plains, it doesn't contain much moisture anymore. In fact, the weather system starts taking up moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate east of the Rocky Mountains. That's the exact location of the belt where so few Americans live. It's one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came in the 19th century, they were like, nah, I'll just continue west. Plus, there was the gold rush in California they were heading for. The climate in this part of the plains isn't great for agriculture, and huge fluctuations in air temperature don't help either. In a single day, temperatures can drop from 70 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. These sudden changes in outside temperature are harmful to human health. It's like stepping inside an air-conditioned room on a sizzling summer day. Not a pleasant feeling. Southern California has a similarly dry climate, yet close to 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous U.S. state. Their secret? A vast network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, plus a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains get very hot, while winters are extremely cold. The reason behind these wild weather patterns are polar winds. They get a piggyback ride along the ridges of the Rockies and then rapidly descend into the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, But later in the afternoon, the temperature can easily drop below zero. You just wouldn't know how to dress, and you probably wouldn't want to relocate here. That's what 99% of Americans think too. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we choose to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You've guessed it correctly, it's Australia. Nearly 70% of the country is either arid or semi-arid. That's a subtle way of saying that it's a desert. That's why Australians are huddled in coastal areas. 90% of them live in big cities, such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. They build it inland close to a water source. But Australia's interior is sparsely populated. Just like in the States, there is only one major town in an area the size of 12 Lake Michigans. A huge shout out to the residents of Alice Springs. They truly live in an oasis. And what about places with a temperate climate like Europe? The population is evenly distributed here, right? Well, yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in urban areas. They have plenty of major cities to choose from. Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Cologne all have over 1 million residents. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population over 1 million can you name? Okay, Paris, definitely. It has over 12 million residents in the metropolitan area. But now comes the staggering fact. The next two cities on the list have a population of barely 2 million, respectively. Can you notice the huge imbalance? This is the case in most large European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital, Athens. So, the largely underpopulated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is the land of opportunities, but chances of finding a better life are greater in large cities. The country's top 100 metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of the nation's GDP, and most of them are located on the east and the west coast. There are no cities with over 1 million residents in America's underpopulated belt. There's a beautiful island in the Atlantic Ocean 25 miles off the coast of Brazil. It's easy to reach, has an endless beach line, steep rocks to climb, and vibrant tropical greenery. Yet there isn't a single hotel here, no one's hiking on all those rocks, no one's watching sunsets by the ocean, and you'll never see kids build sandcastles on the beach. People left this island a long time ago and will unlikely ever come back to live here. It's been long since taken over by creatures you'd rather never meet. Ilha da Queimada Grande has the highest concentration of venomous snakes in the world. It's the only natural habitat of the golden lancehead viper, one of the most dangerous snakes on the planet. Somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 of these critters live here. They say you're never more than 3 feet away from meeting one of them on the island. They're like life insurance salesmen. Lancehead vipers have venom that's 3 to 5 times stronger than that of their closest mainland relatives. Evolution helped them to develop it to keep them properly fed. Their only prey is birds that visit the island to rest. Lanceheads have to slither up the rocks for lunch and can't wait and trace those birds like other snakes. So they developed a super venom that works almost instantly. One legend says the snakes ended up in the middle of the ocean thanks to pirates. They were looking for a good place to hide their booty, their gold. The island was a perfect match. They also needed something to protect their treasures from any invaders. So they brought some snakes, and those multiplied quickly. A more realistic explanation involves not humans, but rising sea levels. Snake Island used to be part of the Brazilian mainland, but the sea isolated it from the rest of the country around 11,000 years ago. The snakes that ended up on that island were able to spread and thrive because they had no predators to bother them. And when people tried to, let's just say it didn't end well. Another island legend is about a fisherman who came here to pick bananas. He didn't expect he'd have the company of venomous snakes, and they were ecstatic about a new item on the menu. The fisherman ran for his life back to the water, but had been bitten before he managed to jump into his boat. A couple days later, his boat was found, but he didn't make it through the journey. Snake Island has long been uninhabited, but it used to have a human population for a few years, from 1909 to 1920. It was the lighthouse keeper, his wife, and 3 kids. Their task was not to let people on the island. According to another legend, one night snakes got inside their house through the windows. The parents grabbed their kids and tried to escape to the boat. Sadly, the snakes were faster. No one of the family had survived that visit. The lighthouse has been automated. Now the Navy visit it regularly to check if it's in order and keep visitors away from the island. It's both for the safety of people and for the good of snakes that are a critically endangered species. Some of those people are tourists looking for adventures. Others are smugglers that capture and sell lance heads for $10,000 to $30,000. Animal collectors and scientists are willing to pay that price. There are rumors that the venom helps cure heart conditions. In the past, someone tried to set the island on fire to get rid of the snakes altogether and clear the land for agriculture. But the snakes have an important mission. It's crucial to study them to better understand the whole lancehead snake family and to treat people who get bitten by them on the mainland. Such incidents happen a lot in Brazil. If you really want to visit the island, you have to be one of those biologists or researchers who use it as a real-life lab to study the golden lanceheads. You must go through a lot of paperwork and get an official permission for a visit. There will also always be a doctor in the group to help others if something goes wrong, and Navy officers to make it safe. Elsewhere, there are places where people do survive alongside snakes. Musambo Island on Lake Victoria in Uganda is home to 2,000 snakes and less than 100 people. That's a ratio of over 20 snakes per person. Rock pythons, cobras, vipers. You can find those even in people's houses. Sometimes they share beds with the locals. They believe the island is home to many kinds of spirits that have transformed into snakes. The people are just guests here, and they must never ever hurt those snakes. Even if you find a cobra under your pillow, you aren't supposed to scream for help. You'll scare away good luck. And if you hurt a snake, well, prepare to pack your bags and leave the island for good. There are also monitor lizards on the island. The snakes live in peace with them and the locals. They feed mainly on bird eggs and won't attack you first. The real danger of North Sentinel Island isn't the snakes, it's the people. The island, about the size of Manhattan and surrounded by corals, is home to one of the most isolated tribes on the planet, the Sentinelese. They're a hunter-gatherer society that doesn't welcome any strangers at all. The only safe outside visit took place in 1967. Based on what they saw back then, anthropologists guess there could be anywhere between 50 and a couple hundred people living on the island. No one else in the world speaks or understands their language. Another dangerous place is Makajima Island in Japan, south of Tokyo. It's famous for the active volcano it sits on. There have been 6 eruptions in the last century alone. Poisonous gas has been leaking through the ground ever since the latest incident in 2000. For years, all residents and tourists had to carry gas masks at all times when on the island. When the siren went off, it was a sign to put it on immediately. It meant the sulfur levels in the air had dangerously risen. Luckily, it's been years since the gas masks were necessary. Volcanic activity made Lake Kivu in Africa a dangerous place as well. It sits exactly where tectonic plates are slowly moving away from one another. It makes the Earth's crust thinner and the volcanoes more active. That's why there are hot springs under Kivu that send hot water, carbon dioxide, and methane into the lake. Microorganisms that live in the lake generate more methane. All these gases remain in the water because the lake is really deep. This mix is denser than regular lake water, so the lake has unusual layers. Kivu is dangerous because all the gases trapped in it could find a way out. That would be a disaster. Saba is a tiny Caribbean island that's seen more storms in the last 150 years than any other place in the world. There were over 60 big hurricanes, 15 Category 3 storms, and 7 Category 5 ones, the most destructive a hurricane can get. If you want to try your luck, visit in winter. You'll be less likely to witness a storm, but landing will still tickle your nerves. Sabah also happens to have one of the shortest and most dangerous runways on the planet, stuck between 2 rocky ridges. Bouvet Island is the loneliest and most remote one in the world. The nearest piece of land is 1,000 miles north, and the Antarctic coast is 1,100 miles to the south. Fewer than 100 people have ever been here, mostly scientists that used to work at a research station. If you decided to travel there, the journey would take days. If something went wrong, there would be no one to save you in time. Plus, 93% of the island is covered with a glacier, and there's just one appropriate place to moor a boat. Hey, sounds like fun! Sign me up! Not. Mount Washington in the US gets way more visitors, but not everyone comes back safely. It's known as the most dangerous small mountain on the planet. The winds here are the fastest on the surface of the Earth, reaching 200 miles per hour. Hey, let's go fly a kite, huh? Freezing temperatures and heavy snowfalls don't help the ascent either. Hikers are often steered away from trails and roads. Even if you do make it to the top, you'll experience overloads like on the peak of Mount Everest.
Fraser Island sits off the coast of sunny Queensland, Australia. But don't fall for its beauty. It's home to the most dangerous beach in the world. There's nowhere on the island to seek medical attention. If you do run into danger, you're on your own. Dingo attacks are super common here. If you don't know what a dingo is, it looks like an adorable dog. But beware, this wild breed is extremely dangerous. And the dingo's gnashing teeth aren't the only thing to be scared of. The seas around the island are swimming with great white sharks. There's jellyfish in the water too. Fraser Island is home to some of the world's most dangerous kinds, including the Portuguese bluebottle. One sting from its venomous tentacle is enough to take down an adult human. Even if you manage to avoid the creatures on the island, the sea itself is perilous. The waters are incredibly rough and have powerful riptides. These are strong currents that will pull you away from the shore. And remember, there are no lifeguards to come to your rescue if you get in trouble. Even the sand is dangerous. Car rollovers in the thick dunes happen all the time. It's definitely best to swap your car for a dune buggy. Travelers also often drive down the dunes straight into the lakes below. But the lakes are incredibly shallow, which is not very safe. Fraser Island is also known for its beautiful lookout points, but you'll need to watch your step. You might feel on top of the world, but stay well away from the edges as jagged rocks and crashing waves line the shore below. There's an island in Brazil known as Snake Island, which is equally dangerous. I wonder what the hazard could be here. It's home to thousands of golden lancehead vipers, which are one of the most venomous snakes on the planet. They grow to over 20 inches long, and their fast-acting venom melts the flesh from around their bites. There are around 4,000 snakes on the tiny 106-acre isle. Snake Island has become so dangerous that the Brazilian authorities had to ban everyone from going there. For years, the only human inhabitants to brave the island were a lighthouse keeper and his family. But local legend says that one night a group of snakes crawled in through a window to attack, and the family was never seen again. Known as the Gas Mask Town, the island of Miyake-jima is not one to visit in a hurry. It's home to a fiery, active volcano that has erupted several times over the past few years. There were several massive eruptions leading to the spread of a highly poisonous gas across the island. Residents are now required to carry gas masks at all times, and a terrifying alarm blares across the island whenever the poison levels get too high. The island is also in the middle of the Devil's Sea. Ships mysteriously vanish in the area, and experts have no idea why. The North Sentinel Island is home to a remote and unwelcoming tribe. They lived alone on the island without any modern technology or contact with the outside world for over 60,000 years. And that's just the way they like it. They've been known to fire arrows at anyone who attempts to enter the island. There are many stories of people visiting the island, and they are never seen again. It's not ghoulish ghosts or slithering snakes that you have to worry about on the Caribbean island of Saba, it's hurricanes. The tiny island has been hit by more severe hurricanes than anywhere in the world over the last 150 years. There have even been 7 tropical cyclones, which is an intense circular storm. The winds in these storms can reach 254 kilometers an hour. Try standing up in that. You'll also struggle to find a pilot who'll even land on the island. It's incredibly dangerous not because of the winds, but because it's home to the shortest runway in the world. It's only 440 yards long. 2 huge rocky ridges surround the runway, so there's no room for mistakes. The Kilauea beaches of Hawaii used to be one of the most dangerous in the world. The Kilauea volcano has been almost consistently erupting for the past 35 years, spewing red-hot lava into the surrounding waters. The water temperatures have even passed boiling point as a result of the lava. Happily, it's no longer active. While the island of Bikini Atoll might sound like the perfect summer vacation destination, it's most certainly not. The problem is that this place has dangerously high radiation levels, and the locals had to leave it. Although the island was declared safe in the 90s, its original inhabitants have refused to return. The lack of fishing in the area has also led to a massive increase in sharks who swim the waters in search of their next meal. Strangely, the corals and reefs are thriving. From the distance, Ramri Island looks idyllic. White sand, swaying palms. But beware. They say thousands of hungry saltwater crocodiles used to lurk there, ready to strike at any time. The exact number of those animals was unknown, and some scientists claim that there are quite a few of them right now. I'd stay well clear of the island though. I don't really feel like becoming crocodile food. Skeleton Coast in Namibia is appropriately named as the harsh landscape and lack of water make life almost impossible. Whale carcasses, turtle shells, and elephant rib cages litter the shore. If that isn't bad enough, lions and hyenas patrol the beach in search of their next meal. The surrounding waters are just as dangerous, as they are home to 11 different species of shark. Many sailors have become lost on this coast and have never been seen again. Cape Tribulation in Australia also lives up to its name as it is packed, full of dangers. Swimmers have to wear special stinger suits because the water is teeming with stinging jellyfish. Saltwater crocodiles also hide in the water, but they don't make a suit to keep you safe from those. It's not just the jellyfish that sting. The area is covered in stinging trees. The trees have jagged leaves that give the crocs' teeth a run for their money. On land, there's angry cassowary birds. There are flightless birds that are the same size as an ostrich. They have sharp talons that can easily slice through skin. The Optical beach in Norway is one of the best places to see the northern lights, but you'll be lucky if you survive more than one night there. The seas surrounding the island can reach 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just in the summer. It probably feels like swimming in ice cream. For years, Gansby Beach has remained a habitat for the most dangerous creatures on the planet. Sharks are particular fans of its waters, and the coastal stretch is known as the Great White Shark Capital. The sharks are attracted to the 60,000 sea lions that flock to the beach every year. Not just shark food, wild sea lions can be unpredictable and aggressive towards humans. Comoro Islands are the worst vacation destination for those who don't really like mosquitoes. The place is swarming with the little guys. Locals say all the water on the island must be contaminated because of them. So they like to sterilize water before drinking, making ice, and even brushing their teeth. If you're really into coconuts, there's one place you should probably go to grab some. I'm talking Danger Island. Yep, it's the real name of one of the islands in the Chagos archipelago. It shouldn't scare you off though. The major problem it has is parking. I mean, safe anchorage for those who come there. Finally, while it may sound dreamy, you're probably going to want to avoid the beaches of the Amazon. Sharp-toothed red-bellied piranhas, anacondas, and electric eels are just some of the beach's regular residents. It has one of the widest varieties of animal species on the planet, including the Amazonian giant centipede, which has a poisonous bite. It's not just the animals of the Amazon that you have to watch out for. Strychnos and curare are the two Amazonian plants that are super poisonous. Mexico is huge and one of the most populated countries in the world. Over 128 million people live there. But why did more than half of them decide to pack up in this tiny strip? This area in the center of the country makes up only 18% of Mexico, and the locals have been living there for centuries. All because it seems to be the only livable place in the country. To the north, there are hot, dry deserts. Let's face it, it may be pretty hard to survive in such climatic conditions. To the south, there are jungles, and those are nightmarish. Jungles are warm and wet, so they might trick you into thinking that they'll be a cozy home for you. But it's very hard to build anything in them. The concrete won't dry because of awful unstoppable rains, and the heat messes up asphalt roads. This is why there are only 8 paved roads through the southern jungles connecting Mexico to Central America. Roads are crucial for proper life. More roads mean better and cheaper transportation, which helps people trade, do business, and make more money. But jungles have even bigger problems than just a lack of roads. Farming. Most of the nutrients in the jungle are in the plants, old wood, and decaying leaves. When these things decay, they become McDonald's-level meals for insects, fungi, and bacteria. They immediately start recycling the nutrients so fast that almost none reach the soil. With no nutrients, the soil becomes barren and useless. Oh, and we still need to clear the jungles from time to time, otherwise they may become impossible to get through. People do that by using slash and burn methods. Because of this, they often end up with poor soil that needs lots of fertilizers to grow crops. And don't forget about the ever-present jungle pests. These guys pounce on the crops, and no amount of pesticides can get rid of them forever. To make matters even worse, nearly 70% of Mexico is located in the mountains. It's one of the most mountainous countries in the world, similar to Switzerland. And mountains, just like rain, do everything in their power to prevent humanity from thriving. Building infrastructure there is nearly impossible. It requires tons of money and labor compared to flatlands. And they also make transportation between these valleys and to the coast much more challenging. Now, imagine mountains combined with the jungles. Exactly. But hold on a minute. Isn't the central strip of Mexico filled with the highest mountains in the country? This area is packed with plateaus and valleys and sits at elevations of 7,000 feet or more. This is as high as a ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. Then why in the world does everyone still live here? Turns out, these are actually good mountains. Since they're so high, they block the hotness of the desert and the tropical zones. This way, they create cooler, drier, and more temperate climates. The soil here is super fertile and great for farming, all because of the plot twist. Many of the surrounding mountains are actually volcanoes. Volcanoes, while scary, can also be super useful. They've been erupting for millions of years, and when they do that, they mix rich minerals into the soil. They're like natural fertilizer. So the land here is perfect for growing crops, especially calorie-heavy grains like corn. That's why we get so much corn or maize from Mexico. Also, many volcanic areas have natural hot springs where people can relax and enjoy a warm soak. Finally, mountains help reduce the spread of viruses and insects. This is one of the reasons why Mesoamerica became one of the first cradles of civilization in history. Thousands of years ago, the ancient city of Teotihuacan thrived here. This city reached a population of at least 125,000 people, bigger than Monaco or Liechtenstein. It was one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Back in the days of the Aztec Empire, this area was home to 5 large lakes and many rivers that provided tons of fresh water for farming. Also, people used boats to transport goods. This boosted trading and cultural growth. But living in the mountains still isn't perfect. Only about 12% of Mexico's land is good for farming, so mostly people farm in the central volcanic valleys, where they've lived for centuries. Also, because the elevation is so high, the rivers flow from the mountains to the ocean. gravity plays its tricks and the currents accelerate and become stronger. Because of this, there's no cheap river transport between Mexico City and the ocean. The rivers are too dangerous for the ships. Instead, people have to rely on more expensive methods like roads, railways, and airplanes. Veracruz used to be the local star port. It was the only safe and calm place on the Gulf of Mexico. Since it was the only natural harbor for miles along Mexico's flat coastline, it was super important. Not only for locals, but also a hot target for invaders. And while mountains could keep Mexico's heartland kinda safe, protecting coastal areas was harder because of them. Connecting Veracruz to Mexico City was a massive headache. And don't forget that living near volcanoes is still scary. Every now and then they throw temper tantrums and start spewing lava, ash, and smoke everywhere. This is extremely dangerous, so locals have to evacuate to keep everyone safe. One famous volcanic event happened in 1943 with the Paricutin volcano. Imagine a farmer's surprise when a volcano suddenly erupted right in his cornfield. The volcano grew rapidly and buried 2 villages in lava and ash. Most people managed to evacuate in time, but not all of them. Another dramatic event was the eruption of El Chichon in 1982. This eruption was a big surprise and caused a lot of destruction. Finally, there's Popocatépetl volcano. In the Aztec language, this means smoking mountain. People affectionately call it El Popo. This volcano is still active and quite close to Mexico City. El Popo frequently lets off steam and ash, reminding everyone that it's very much alive. And living near El Popo means always being prepared that something might happen. Also, the reason why volcanoes are there is because the local tectonic plates are pretty active. The ground likes to move, which means that earthquakes aren't a rare occasion here either. Well, at least the climate on the Central Strip is nice, so modern construction materials like concrete and asphalt thrive here. Finally, we can build some roads, right? Oops, never mind. Because of the elevation, the locals only managed to build the first railroad in the 19th century. Meanwhile, the US had already built over 50,000 miles of tracks at the time. Can you imagine? Since Mexico is like a jigsaw puzzle of separate valleys, it's very tricky to build roads and railways through the mountains. Basically, there are no cheap ways to move goods in the country. But a few cities found a way to thrive outside the Central Strip. Chihuahua is one of the largest cities in Mexico, and it's doing pretty well. They boast good automotive and electronics industries. That's probably because it's connected to the US border, which really helps trading. Hermosillo is also located in the desert, but luckily it's right near the Gulf of California, so the temperatures aren't that awful. Plus, it helps marine trading. In this city, they even made up some advanced irrigation techniques that make the desert bloom. Also, Hermosillo is a major center for the aerospace industry. However, Mexico City still remains the life center in the country, and it's one of the world's largest megacities, with over 22 million people. But it's hard for the central government in Mexico City to control this puzzle of a country. Trading between the central valleys and the northern deserts or southern jungles is very tough, and supporting the economy may be sort of frustrating. Why is Australia so strangely empty? Why haven't we discovered so much of the ocean? Is our planet a perfect sphere? And was the Earth once more purple than green? I bet you didn't know these facts about our planet, so let's find it all out. Australia is really massive. To make it easy to understand its size, it's nearly as large as the entirety of Europe. Home to around 26 million people, Australia is among the countries with the least population per area. It's ranked only 55th for the highest population in the world, while it has the 6th largest land area. Why is so much of it empty? A good guess would be the many dangerous animals hiding behind every rock. At least this is enough for me to avoid Australia. But there's one specific reason to explain this. The dryness of Australia ensures that 85% of the population lives within 30 miles of the coast. and 80% of them live along the eastern side where rainfall is more common. But although there is an overall lack of rainfall, only 20% of Australia is unlivable desert, and only 40% is considered not habitable by human standards. The water consumption is actually higher than their average rainfall each year, but there is a further ancient water source hidden way below, which can support a much larger population. It's one of the largest underground freshwater resources in the world, the Great Artesian Basin. It covers a staggering 656,000 square miles, which is 1/5 the size of Australia. It holds enough water to cover the Earth under a 1.5 feet deep layer of water. Or, more usefully, it could provide enough water for thirsty Australians over the next 1,500 years. Only 6.5% of Australia has soil suitable for farming, so this doesn't seem like a huge amount. But in case you forgot, Australia is big, and this small percentage is about the size of France. With this massive area available for farming, Australia has more than enough to feed its population, with a further 70% of agriculture products that are exported overseas. So, with plenty of land, food, and water, why are the population figures so low? A very slow migration process is the reason. First, only people from the United Kingdom lived there. Then, they opened their borders to other Europeans, and this restriction remained in place until 1973. You would think almost 200 years would be enough time for a lot of people to migrate, but Australia was just so far away. The risk of traveling such a long way and the cost of the journey meant that people from Europe prefer the shorter and cheaper options to migrate elsewhere, like Canada or the USA. For the past 2,000 years, people have understood that Earth is round. But did you know that it's not a perfect sphere? Through the wobbly rotation of Earth, our planet constantly changes its size, very slowly of course. The North and South poles are surprisingly flat. Earth is pretty much like a ball being squished. Imagine there's a giant hand with the fingers pressing at both poles. Because of this pressure, the equator pushes a little outwards. Along with an uneven gravitational field, Earth has loads of gravity glitches, some positive and others negative, creating an uneven, rocky, and bumpy surface. Some places on Earth have more gravity than others. If you weighed yourself along the equator, you would weigh 0.5% less than at the poles. Not a whole lot, and definitely not worth the trip to change your weight. If you were to measure the length from the center of the Earth towards the furthest point of Earth, you would be shocked that Mount Everest isn't at the end of it. Instead, it's along the equator, which is the pushed out part. Ecuador's mountain Chimborazo would actually be the tallest point on Earth, as it's the furthest from the center. We still have around 80% of the ocean to map, which is crazy considering how much of the solar system we've explored in comparison. But we're still aware of many of the unbelievable details about the ocean. It covers over 80% of the world's surface, where 94% of the Earth's wildlife lives. And from some of the life in it, up to 80% of the world's oxygen is produced mainly from plankton, algae, and bacteria. One of the most famous, already mapped places is the Mariana Trench. It's the deepest point on Earth, as low as almost 7 miles deep. That's a huge 5 times the length of the Grand Canyon and deeper than Mount Everest is tall. It's also home to one of the most ancient seabeds on Earth, casually laying low for about 180 million years. The pressure at the bottom is over 1,000 bars, but although this is 1,000 times more than normal pressure, life still flourishes here. Throughout the ocean, there is an estimated over 3 million shipwrecks lying in the murky depths. Countless artifacts sit there untouched, and there could be more than all the world's museums. The mid-ocean ridge is the longest in the world, reaching 40,000 miles. That's almost 10 times the size of the Andes, the longest mountain range on land. The sun is the reason behind the blue and aqua colors of the ocean. This color isn't from the reflection of the sky, though they are both blue for the same reason. The surface of our planet receives white light from the sun, and it absorbs the orange, red, and yellow light stronger. It doesn't absorb the blue light so much, so it returns to how we see it. Of course, this only occurs based on how pure the water is. If the water is full of mud or algae, they scatter the light and overpower the water's natural blueness. There are many factors that determine what color we see on our planet. Could you believe that the Earth was green before? Instead, it was purple. Chlorophyll in our atmosphere absorbs mainly blue and red wavelengths from the sun and reflects the green ones to what we see our planet as today. Long ago, ancient microbes called retinal dominated the Earth instead of chlorophyll. They absorbed green light and reflected red and violet light. Those microbes had a simpler structure, so they were easier to produce in the low oxygen environment of the early Earth. They provided our planet with a purplish color instead of green. But chlorophyll is more efficient, and as the Earth was developing, it eventually took over. Imagine that billions of years ago, faraway observers could see our home as a small purple dot. I wonder if we could have also been purple. Probably not. The biggest tree on Earth is a giant sequoia named General Sherman. It stands over 280 feet, almost reaching the height of a 26-story building. They believe it to be 2,700 years old, with a circumference of 1,000 inches. Its weight is a staggering 1,800 tons. That's heavy, but it isn't the heaviest living thing on Earth. In Utah, a huge grove of trees called Pando works like a single colony of trees. The massive root system connects all of them together with up to 47,000 stems. It weighs up to 6,000 tons and is 80,000 years old. It makes it the oldest living thing known to humans. Now, what about the biggest area of one being? Off the coast of Western Australia, a seaweed grows to an unthinkable size. The Poseidon's ribbon weed has been growing for 4,500 years, spreading underground clone shoots. It's all connected and shares the same DNA with most of its shoots. It covers a massive 77 square miles, the same size as 28,000 soccer fields, or the size of Nebraska. And it won't stop there either, as it continues to grow by 2 feet each year. It's hard to even picture the scale of these enormous beings. Now, just imagine if they were all purple. We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. The Earth is no longer fit for living, so you'll need to find your own new home. You immediately get the brilliant idea to apply for a job as an astronaut. You'll be able to wait over the hustle and bustle on the International Space Station until humanity finds a new home, right? The longest time a human has spent in space so far is 437 days and a few extra hours. And when I say in space, I mean the ISS, because a human being without the proper equipment in open space would only last a few seconds. The ISS is designed to support human life in space for extended periods of time. Extended, but not endless. The station gets resupplied with food, water, air, fuel, scientific equipment, and other necessities every 3 months. With no Earth or humans to send the mission, this lifeline will soon be broken. The station is a huge ship moving through space at over 17,000 miles per hour. It faces pretty harsh conditions, from radiation to micrometeoroids and huge temperature ups and downs. That's why the system regularly needs patching up. In addition to wear and tear, there are also unexpected events that can require resupply missions. In 2020, the crew discovered a leak that was causing a gradual loss of air pressure. They eventually found cracks in one of the modules. The crew managed to fix it, but it proves how important it is to have enough spare parts on board. Let's say the future humans will manage to find a way to run the station non-stop without restocking. Astronauts already grow plants in space in closed boxes with low-energy LED lights. It's not only a source of vitamins, without which humans can't survive, but a great mood booster. We'd also need more advanced closed-loop life support systems to recycle air and water efficiently. It's a system that captures carbon dioxide from the air by passing it through small beads. Then it uses steam to separate the carbon dioxide and transform it into methane and water. Water then divides back into oxygen. But even with all the possible advances, there's another problem: the health of the astronauts. They live and work in a microgravity environment, and they rely on carefully controlled life support systems. But our bodies aren't designed to live in weightlessness forever. It's like standing on your head, because the reduced gravity makes bodily fluids accumulate in the upper parts of your body. The result is a puffy red face. The gravitational force on the ISS is weaker than on Earth, so muscles don't have to work as hard and bones gradually lose their density. That's why each crew member follows a strict daily exercise routine. The heart muscle also weakens because it doesn't have to use as much effort to circulate blood throughout the body. Without Earth's protective atmosphere, astronauts are continuously exposed to cosmic rays. They are invisible waves that can cause some serious health issues. So maybe we're better off opting for Mars or the Moon for an alternative home.
It's one of the most famous Instagrammable spots in the world. There are pictures of people leaning on it or pretending to support it so it doesn't fall. There are even images of it looking like an intricate ice cream scoop. Of course, I'm talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa, a famous Italian landmark. It always looks as if it's seconds away from toppling over. Located in the Italian city of Pisa, which would make sense, this construction is better known for its precarious posture rather than its history or purpose. Back in 1178, when the construction of the tower was still underway, people realized that the building was starting to lean over, and that was even before they had reached the third floor. They first blamed the architect, whose left leg was shorter than his right by 2 inches and had a built-in lean. But no, I just made that up. They soon figured out that this was happening because of the soft soil beneath the tower. It soon became obvious that starting construction on top of soil made of clay, fine sand, and shells wasn't a promising idea. Centuries went by. Soon, people understood that the 180-foot-tall tower wasn't merely leaning, it was falling in slow-mo, and at an alarming rate of 0.08 of an inch per year. Now that may not sound like a lot, but multiply that by hundreds of years and, well, you can just look at the pictures. These days, the Leaning Tower is more than 16 feet off its perpendicular axis. It's not toppling over, only because its center of gravity continues to fall within the base of the structure. Plus, it's constantly monitored by local authorities. Now, since I've already got you excited for your next trip to Italy, you should know that the Leaning Tower of Pisa isn't the only crooked building in the country. About 2 hours away from Pisa, up north in the city of Bologna, there's not one but 2 leaning constructions, le due torri, which sounds better than the 2 towers. Now these towers were each named for the families that funded their construction, the Azianelli family and the Garasenda family. Because of its tilt, the Garasenda Tower is no longer open for visitors. The Azianelli Tower, however, can still offer tourists a wonderful view of the city. That is, if you manage to finish climbing almost 500 steps. It does come with a catch for students, though. Italians have a local superstition saying those who climb the tower up to the top will never be able to finish their studies. Well, that's certainly a disincentive. Now, Londoners have their own tilted tower, but it's probably not the one you may think about. Yep, it's the famous Big Ben or Elizabeth Tower. That's its official name, by the way. Big Ben is just the bell. Luckily, it's not leaning to one side as fast as other more impressively crooked buildings. It's currently tilting at a rate of 0.3 inches per year. This whole tilting thing is happening mostly because of several infrastructure projects, like the expansion of the London Underground or the construction of parking lots near this historic building. Locals are not that concerned, though. If the latest data is correct, it'll take Elizabeth Tower about 4,000 years to catch up with its Italian counterpart, the Tower of Pisa. Anyway, there's a strangely shaped building in Poland as well. It's called the Little Crooked House. You can find it in Sopot, Poland. Its construction was finished in 2004. This building looks like it just jumped out of a fairy tale. And no wonder. The architects behind this project claimed they had been inspired by books illustrated by Jan Schanzer. This project has a lot of striking details. For example, warped walls, sandstone frame windows, and stone decorations. The building also features curved tinted glass windows and a concave roof. As a popular tourist attraction in Poland, the Little Crooked House currently has a lot of shops, offices, and restaurants. Now, you don't have to travel all the way to Europe to check out tilting buildings. The Millennium Tower, located in the city of San Francisco, is leaning, sinking, and sliding. Either they've signed the building up for dance classes, or there's something wrong with it, don't you think? The biggest issue with the Millennium Tower apparently has to do with the 60 to 90 foot long friction piles that support it. They appear to have been driven into the sandy upper soil rather than the bedrock, which is 200 feet further down. Since the building is placed on land that can soon become too mushy, the solution might be to anchor the construction down to the bedrock. The current plan is to add a bunch of piles to help reduce the weight of the building's foundation. Surprisingly, in 2017, the inspection carried out by the local authorities confirmed that the building was still within safety requirements. There was some damage to the foundation and electrical system, though. But not all leaning structures are tilted as a result of an engineering mistake. The Capitol Gate Tower in Abu Dhabi, for example, is a 520-foot-tall skyscraper that leans almost 18 degrees to the west. It even made it to the Guinness World Records in 2010 as the world's furthest leaning human-made tower. The engineering effort spent on it is impressive, to say the least. The angle of the tower is evened out by the world's first pre-cambered core. That's a fancy way of saying that loads of concrete was mixed with steel, and 490 piles going nearly 100 feet into the soil were added to the construction. Another modern and inclined architectural design is that of the Tower of Montreal, part of the city's Olympic Stadium, which is currently the tallest leaning building. It's over 575 feet tall. The Gate of Europe in Madrid consists of a couple of impressive twin towers, 374 feet tall and inclined at about 15 degrees. Well, we're heading back to Europe to the City of Love. Before visiting Paris, don't forget to check out the Sinking House or Tilting House. Trust me, it's a place not a lot of people know about, and it's a great location for spectacular pictures. It's quite easy to miss out since this construction isn't actually leaning. But if you angle your camera correctly, this quirky optical illusion will make your viewers think that you just visited a house that is halfway swallowed by the ground it stands on. Whoa! When you're in Montmartre, next to Sacré-Cœur, you'll see some steps. On the right-hand side, there's an orange house. And here's the trick. Because this house is located behind a pretty steep hill, all you need to do is rotate your camera at about 45 degrees to get the desired effect. Or you can take an even easier route and just edit the photo after you've taken it. There are cities in the world that are sinking right at this moment, some of them at an alarming rate. Probably the most worrying is the city of Venice. But if you ask a Venetian whether their city is sinking, they'll say, less than the sea is rising. Well, you got me there, pal. Under the city, there is sedimentary soil, which is still compacting and settling. That's why the problem here appears to be twofold. Not only did Venice sink about 9 inches in the past century, but the sea level also rises with each passing year. This makes this gorgeous region more prone to flooding. Even worse, during the colder season, the phenomenon called aqua alta, or high water, occurs. That's when an unusually high tide arrives together with strong winds and storms. In 1966, for example, one such storm raised the water in Venice to more than 6 feet above the usual level. One of the fastest sinking cities in the world is Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, which is also one of the world's most populated locations. The process has been happening for decades, and if the current data is correct, over 95% of North Jakarta will be flooded by 2050. The northern part of the city has sunk a shocking 8 feet in 10 years, and now the rate is almost 10 inches per year. Jakarta is also sliding, in some locations at a rate of almost 6 inches each year. The rest of the city is sinking and sliding too, but at least it happens at a more moderate rate compared to other locations in the world. The main reason for this alarming process is the fact that there isn't a big enough water supply for the huge population of the city, over 10 million people as of 2020. Strangely enough, the city does have fresh water at its disposal. It has 300 days of rain per year, and 13 rivers pass through it. The problem lies with the fact that this water cannot be stored, as Jakarta's wetlands have been turned into a concrete jungle. That's why people living in the city have to make their own wells to get fresh water. Continuously taking water from the ground leads to loads of empty underground space called subsidence. This leaves the city suspended on almost hollow ground, and eventually it will sink.
Hey, look at this stunning futuristic interior. It's a long studio room with a low ceiling, white walls, and windows overlooking the forest. And there's also a large panoramic window in the corner. You can easily invite hundreds of guests here, and they will all be impressed. So what, would you like to buy or rent this spot? Oh, there's another minor nuance. This house is an airplane. Unfortunately, you can only fly somewhere on it if you invest a couple of $1 million for repairs, but it's possible to live here. A resident of Oregon, Bruce Campbell, created this place. He turned a giant Boeing 727 into his home, where he spends about 6 months every year. Bruce installed 2 bathrooms and a shower, made a kitchen, and equipped this place with electricity. It has everything you need for a comfortable stay. But the most incredible thing is that you can create precisely the same house. To understand how to do this, let's look at Bruce's story. As a teenager, he was watching TV when he saw a report of an aircraft boneyard. These iron birds amazed him and inspired him to create a new home. Growing up, Bruce began to study electrical engineering and always remembered his teenage dream. In the 70s, he bought 10 acres of land in the woods near the town of Hillsboro, Oregon. This area is approximately equal to 8 football fields. After that, he began to look for a plane. In 1999, he hired a rescue company to help him find a Boeing. Soon, they found a 200-seat passenger aircraft in Greece. Since the plane was already out of order and no one would fly it, Bruce bought it for little money. It was just $100,000. The amount is small, considering that a new Boeing costs about $100 million. Airport staff removed the engine and fuel from the plane, disassembled it, and sent it to Oregon. After the logistics problems were solved and the plane ended up in the woods, Bruce began to turn it into a house. The repair work lasted several years. When everything was ready, the media found out about Bruce and made him a celebrity. He showed that even such gigantic things as an airplane could be recycled. Bruce invites anyone to his house to show that airplanes can be used for cheap housing. The advantages of such a house are that the airplane's outer layer can protect from cold, moisture, wind, and sun. Every year in the US, several hundred aircraft break down. People transport them to the aircraft boneyard, where these planes are waiting for repairs or turning into scrap metal. And many of them are in good condition. Another unusual house is located in Tokyo, Japan. It's definitely not your choice if you go to relax alone or think that home is a place where no one can bother you. Welcome to the transparent house. It looks pretty stylish. There are huge panoramic windows without curtains and no walls and doors between the rooms. There are a bunch of large shelves and ladders inside. You can climb, jump, and hang here. The height of the house is 3 floors. It looks like a modern urban treehouse. This place is open to everyone. And now, take a look at the most fantastic treehouse. Can you see it? No? No wonder. This house is almost invisible in the forest because of its mirrored surface. It's called Mirror Tree House and is located in Sweden. At night with the lights off, this small building completely merges with nature. Now turn on the lights in the windows and take a closer look. This is a stylish and modern building where anyone can spend the night. You need to pay for it though because it's a hotel. Here's another treehouse. More precisely, it's a huge building built on several trees. It's called Minister's Treehouse and is located in Crossville, Tennessee. It's considered to be the biggest treehouse in the world. It's built from recycled wood. It occupies almost 5 floors in height and has several rooms. If elves lived in the forest, then this house would be their bank or the administration of the woods. Let's get down from the trees to the ground, more precisely, under the ground. It's not even a house, but a small town. And every building here is pretty unusual. You won't see this town from the outside. All houses, cafes, post offices, and other buildings are located in the pits from which pipes protrude, releasing steam. Welcome to Coober Pedy, Australia. Enter any house and see that there is ground instead of the usual walls and wallpaper. Such unusual architecture is because this place is the world's largest reserve of opal. Most of these minerals, which are sold all over the world, are mined in this city. Opal was first found in these lands in 1915. Since then, people have been coming here to search for precious stones. There are no mining companies here because it's impossible to determine large deposits of opal with the help of technology. Therefore, people mine it manually with picks and shovels. This work is quite long and difficult. So, the town residents rent a place where they dig and build a house. Spread your arms in different directions. That's the width of our next house. The distance from one wall to the other is less than the length of your body. It looks tiny, but people are happy to live here. Welcome to the Turret House. The narrowest house in the world is located in Poland. On the streets of Warsaw, you will easily notice it. It's like it's stuck between 2 buildings. Everything is pretty cute and stylish inside. The white interior adds a feeling of extra space. The Turret House serves as a transit point for travel writers. If you're working on a book, this place will be a great source of inspiration for you. This house looks like something from another planet. It's called Robert Bruno's Steel House. It stands on 4 legs, has a strangely shaped window, and is made of metal. This strange house is located in Ransom Canyon, Texas. This is the creation of the sculptor Robert Bruno. He built it from the 70s until 2008. He used about 150 tons of blackened steel and made every detail by hand. Unfortunately, the sculptor passed away before he could complete his masterpiece. There's a toilet house in South Korea, close to Seoul. This big building looks like a giant toilet bowl. It's made of steel, white concrete, and glass. The purpose of this house is to promote the hygiene and sanitation of toilets. Many diseases are spread because of poor cleaning. Inside the toilet, you will find 2 guest rooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bathrooms. And to rent the whole building, you need to pay about $50,000. Looking at this house in one of the alleys of London, it may seem to you that the building is about to fall apart. The house was built in the 16th century and originally didn't look like this. But in 1687, the city council ordered the demolition of the building to free space for something else. The house was almost destroyed, but its owner sued the city council. He won the case and the council was obliged to restore the house. But they did it in a hurry, using cheap materials. For many years, the wood has been bending and the house has got such an unusual shape. Let's end our realtor's journey with this fun house. People who love skateboarding will be delighted to visit this place. Welcome to Skateboard House, Malibu, California. You don't leave your home to start riding. The whole house has a circular curved shape and there's no corners in it. There are beds and tables here, which you can also use for tricks.
The conditions on this mysterious island might teach us how we can live on Mars one day. Devon Island is, to this day, the largest uninhabited island on our planet. It's located in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. and it's easy to see why people find it impossible to make a home here. The soil stays frozen throughout the seasons. The eastern part of the island is covered by a thick ice cap all year round. Summers here last for less than 50 days, and by summer, I mean that the ground is snow-free and the temperatures are slightly over 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Since almost no plants are growing here, there are no animals that could have adapted to these conditions. That's why scientists compare this island to what it would be like to live on Mars. In 2001, a project started here on Devon Island looking to discover how people might live and work on other planets, particularly on Mars. It's called the Houghton Mars Project and offered NASA scientists some unique studying opportunities. There are few options here in terms of logistics and transportation, and communicating with people living outside the island is also a bit more difficult. Specialists believe that if we can find solutions to live here, we might be able to do it on Mars too. Think of it as a home-based outer space boot camp. The Pitcairn Islands can be found in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. If you're a fan of adventures and remote places, this is the place to be. But you'll need to buckle up for quite the ride, since no plane has ever reached this place. The only way to reach the Pitcairn Islands is to take a 32-hour yacht ride. No wonder only 50 people are known to live here. Its history is really interesting too. A group of people settled here in the 18th century after a failed marine mission. To this day, all the residents of the island are descending from that initial group. Life's not easy here though. If they need to see a doctor, for example, they need to travel either to the island of Fiji or to New Zealand. Now let's head over to Mexico, where recent technology has allowed scientists to explore some fascinating cenotes, which were previously unknown. Cenotes are also called sinkholes and allow us to see subterranean water bodies. A team of archaeologists, cave divers, underwater photographers, and biologists came together to explore and document the extensive network of sinkholes located in the Yucatan Peninsula. One of the hotspots is located under the main pyramid at the Chichen Itza archaeological site. In total, scientists are looking to explore about 6,000 cenotes stretched across this whole region. The whole project is important not only because of the geological discoveries, but also because of its connection to the Mayan people and their culture. These recent discoveries revealed that for the Mayans, these cenotes weren't simple water sources. They dictated the way they built their constructions and had a huge impact on their spiritual lives too. The tallest mountain in the world is Mount Everest, sure, but it's been explored by scientists and tourists alike and doesn't hold many secrets. The mysterious Ganghar Puensum, on the other hand, is the tallest unclimbed mountain on our planet. The reason behind this unusual situation is not because of its remoteness or harsh conditions. Rather, because it's against local legislation to climb it. It's located in the South Asian territory of Bhutan, and the name of the mountain translates to the White Peak of the Three Spiritual Brothers. Local tradition dictates that mountain peaks shouldn't be available to humans and need to be left to the higher spirits. Mountains in this region can only be climbed up to 3.7 miles, but Ganghar Puensum tops 4.7 miles. For this reason, there's no official record of any human reaching the peak. Almost all of the previous expeditions have been inexplicably stopped at the midpoint. The next unusual spot should be on any travel enthusiast's bucket list, the island of Madagascar. For starters, it's estimated that about 90% of the species of plants and animals that are found here can't be seen anywhere in the world. But there's one small portion of the island that has baffled both tourists and scientists, the Stone Forest. It belongs to the Tsingy de Bemaraha National Park and features some unique limestone formations. They look like thousands of spiky towers that stretch hundreds of feet into the air. The distance between these formations can be anywhere from a few inches to the length of a city street. As beautiful as it is, it's really hard to get here. It'll take you a few days to get there from the nearest city. Once you get to the park, it becomes really difficult to explore too. It can take a whole day to go across as little as half a mile. The word Singis itself translates to where one cannot walk barefoot. To visit the remotest village in the whole world, you'll need to prepare yourself for quite the journey. From the United States, for example, the easiest route involves a 15-hour flight to Cape Town, South Africa, followed by a 6-day boat ride to reach Tristan da Cunha. Or you could take a month-long cruise through the South Atlantic Ocean, whatever works better. Planning in advance is a must, since only 9 boat visits are made to the island yearly. It's just 7 miles long and right in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, stretching a mere 37.8 square miles. There are slightly over 200 residents, and they all farm for a living. They do have internet service, but it's really slow. The people living here speak a dialect of English that is used by the fewest number of people in the world. The town of Coober Pedy in Australia is partially underground. It all began back in 1915, when opal deposits were found in the area. To this day, the town is still the biggest opal mine in the world. People living here figured out that it would be more comfortable for them to stick to the underground, as temperatures above ground can reach 125 degrees Fahrenheit. So, the establishment now has underground stores and galleries. Coober Pedy is also home to the world's first 4-star underground hotel. North Sentinel Island, located near India, is another pretty remote place. Not because of the time it takes to get there or the climate, but because it's home to the world's most mysterious tribe. The population living here is estimated to be between 50 to 400 people and isn't known to have any contact with the outer world. This is mostly because locals don't really enjoy visitors and tend to scare them away, even harming tourists. So, to protect them and their obvious wishes, the island is monitored by the local Indian authorities. It's believed the tribe's people don't have any immunity from modern diseases, so being in contact with foreign people might actually be fatal for the locals. On these French islands, there are no native inhabitants. The Kerguelen Islands are part of the Antarctic lands and are home to just scientists that visit on rotation. At any given time of the year, there are no more than 100 people here, and they're mostly engineers and researchers. There's no plane to get you to these islands, and few tourists are known to have visited them. The island is covered in glaciers, and the soil here isn't friendly to plants or animals. But if you're curious about what this place looks like, you'll need both the money and the time to complete the trip. You can only reach the island by ship, which reaches the shores of Kerguelen only 4 times a year. It isn't cheap to stay in these islands, and you definitely won't find 5-star hotels here. The trip departs from Réunion, and it takes about 28 days to reach the first island. Half of the time will be spent at sea, so be prepared to cover over 5,600 miles of the Indian Ocean.
Okay, here's a quick pop quiz on geography and touristy stuff. What's the biggest city in Italy? Did you say Rome? Then you got it right. Rome has a population of over 2 million people. And what would you say is the current population of Venice? Well, that's a tricky one to know by heart. But to answer correctly, in 2022, it was a little over 258,000 people. Now, what if I told you that for 80% of them, the Venice they live in isn't the tourist and historical one with all the canals. It's rather the other side of town. If you know someone who's traveled to Venice before, they may have sent you a postcard with an image of a gondola in a canal. I bet you never imagined that Venice could also just look like this, just a regular old Italian city. As tourists, we have a strong misconception about what Venice is. We think the real Venice is what we see in the movies. Well, I hate to be the one to pop your illusion, but there's more to Venice than straight canals and old bridges. Here are the boundaries of the real Venice. Probably the postcards you get only picture this bit of the city called Centro Storico, or Historical Center. But the city also includes the mainland, called Terra Firma, where most Venetians live today. The interesting thing to look at is how the number of people living in the historical center has decreased over the years. From then on, the number started to reduce more with each passing year. Today, only 50,000 people can afford to live there. To understand that, let's travel back in time for a moment. Before Venice became an important Italian city, it was nothing but a fisherman's village. It was only around the 5th century that people decided to take a chance and build on the marshy ground of the Venetian islands. If you've ever wondered how Venice holds up, let's just say it's due to strong blocks of wood driven deep into the ground. As it turns out, you need oxygen and water to ruin wood, and in marshy soils, there isn't much oxygen, so the buildings were safe. It was during the Middle Ages that Venice became one of the world's most important maritime empires. You might remember that's where Marco Polo, the famous merchant and explorer, came from. The city was extremely well located, right in the Adriatic Sea, and had access to huge commercial empires of the time, like the city of Constantinople. At that time, the most prestigious jobs you could get were like the ones Marco Polo had, anything related to long-distance trading. Since then, Venice consists of 118 islands, and some say there are around 400 bridges in the city. Quick question here, can you name at least 2 of the most famous Venetian islands? Let's start with Burano. The island of Burano is famous for its lace-making and its super colorful landscape. FYI, Burano is also home to a less famous leaning tower than the one in Pisa. It's called the Tower of Burano. And then there's the island of Murano. They are famous for their products of fine glass. You can find anything from huge vases to water glasses, jewelry, and so on. They're quite exquisite, but also super expensive. But you know what they say, time changes everything. In the 20th century, Venice was no longer the trading hub it once was. Its economic power was failing seriously, so the city decided to invest in something else, its historical value. And the best way they found how to do that was through preservation. Let's face it, if you're a tourist who enjoys history, you would jump at the opportunity of visiting a UNESCO heritage site, wouldn't you? Initially, this was rather good for the city. But the thing is, as tourism in Venice skyrocketed, the old dynamics of the city started to change to keep up with the intense tourism. Truth is, in our day and age, lots of tourists rather buy small and cheap souvenirs than invest their money in expensive manufactured goods, such as the classic Murano glasses. The traditional Venetian stores that were open hundreds of years ago just didn't have the economic power to compete with new stores that opened to cater specifically for tourists. And then, what happened next is something we often call falling down the rabbit hole. Because, as it turned out, tourists attracted more tourists, and Venice lost control over it. The maximum sustainable number of tourists in Venice would be around 22,500 people per day. But in 2021, Venice saw up to 80,000 tourists per day in certain parts of the year. If you remember that there are only 50,000 people living in Venice's historical center nowadays, that almost means that tourists outnumber locals by 2 to 1. This is what gave Venice one of its current nicknames amongst the locals, which is a short-term city. I mean, if you live in a touristy city such as New York City or Paris, you'd be sure to avoid the parts of the city that are more touristy. But in Venice, that's difficult, since we're talking about several small islands. Whether you want it or not, the city is constantly packed. Locals started to complain that things such as getting a table at a restaurant or crossing an important square, such as Piazza San Marco, would take hours. Not to mention that instead of normal car traffic, well, in Venice, you can experience some gondola traffic. But that's not even the worst that's been happening. As the number of tourists per year started to rise exponentially, so did the infrastructure to accommodate all these people. When landlords understood that they could make more money off of tourists than they could with locals, overall prices started to soar. That's why, from the 1950s onward, fewer Venetians were able to continue living in the city's historical center. Landlords decided to more than double the prices of housing. So, a family that paid around 800 euros for their apartment now had to pay something around 1,500 euros to stay in the same place. And social services couldn't even do anything about it because there were so many similar cases happening all over the historical center. This may sound like something small, but when you stop to look at the big picture, it's changing the social fabric of the city. Yep, that's what usually happens in super touristy places. France is having to deal with a similar problem of over-tourism. France's Ministry of Tourism has concluded that tourists are spending less money, yet over-exploiting the classic tourist landmarks. Cities are made up of much more than just buildings and infrastructure. As urban sociologist Georg Simmel said, cities need to be heterogeneous, and by raising the prices of rent so much, the first ones to be kicked out of the city were the younger generations. After that, only well-established elderly people could afford to stay in the city center. Things started getting so out of hand in Venice's historical center that UNESCO itself threatened to put the city on its list of heritage sites in danger of severe damage. That's tough, huh? The city is still trying to find ways to mitigate the effects of tourism. The first thing they did was to ban those huge cruise ships from stopping in the city's historical area. Oh, and the city produced a tourism fee. Normally, anyone sleeping in the historical center already pays a fee. But nowadays, tourists have to register their entry and pay a daily fee for exploring the main island. The profits from this fee are directed toward making life in Venice's city center more affordable. Hopefully these policies will allow Venetians to move back to Venice's city center. Ciao!
You're walking along a hot desert under the scorching sun. You run out of supplies. There's no more water. You dream about rain, but there are no clouds in the sky. With each step, you lose more and more strength and fall. You notice a small pond nearby. Is it real water or just a mirage? You can't get to your feet, so you crawl there. The water is getting closer by the minute, but not because you're moving towards it. It's the water approaching you. In a few minutes, the pond area increases. Here, you're already in it. A small lake is formed, 60 feet deep, at the place where the piece of desert was. This real event happened in 2014 in the Tunisian desert. No one knows exactly on what day the lake appeared, since this part of the south of Tunisia is sparsely populated. At first, shepherds passing by saw the lake and didn't believe their eyes. In the next few hours, hundreds of locals came running to the place. They began to swim, jumping into the water from the surrounding rocks. But a few days later, something strange happened to the lake. In the beginning, it was a crystal clear turquoise blue color, but then it turned dark green. People didn't attach any importance to this and continued to swim. They shouldn't have done that. The scientists and geologists arrived and immediately announced that it wasn't safe to swim in the lake. Muddy green water means the lake is stagnating. It's not refreshed, it's not fed by underground springs. Now the lake is filled with algae and a lot of harmful bacteria that can cause serious diseases. They also found out that this region of Tunisia is filled with huge deposits of phosphate. This substance can disintegrate and leave radioactive traces. The lake can be carcinogenic, toxic, and hazardous for any living organism. But people didn't worry about this too much. They walk in the middle of the desert, while the sun heats the air to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of them are unlikely to refuse to jump into cool water, despite the warnings of scientists. Until now, no one knows exactly the reason for the appearance of the lake. Some scientists believe the lake was formed because of heavy rains. The lake is surrounded by rocks and is located inside a canyon. The water could just accumulate after each storm. Some geologists think an earthquake was the cause of the lake. A small seismic activity provoked the rupture of the Earth's rock above the water table, and through this hole, all the water splashed out. And if this theory is correct, then the lake can be pulled back underground through cracks. This is the same as when you pull the plug out of a drain hole in a filled bathtub. Any small earthquake is like pulling the plug out. Therefore, if you find yourself in these places, don't swim in this radioactive lake. We're going to the Caribbean Islands region. Among the clear blue sea, you can find a unique lake. It's located on one of the paradisiacal islands. You may not even notice the lake right away. The entire territory may seem like a huge concrete platform, but the main thing is not to step on its surface. Pitch Lake is a lake filled not with water, but with liquid asphalt. This is the largest asphalt deposit in the world. Steam is coming from all over the lake as it's hot. The depth of this lake is 250 feet. An entire passenger Boeing could fit there in an upright position. The lake is not fully studied, but scientists believe there's a deep fault in the Earth's crust under it. A huge amount of oil seeps through it. It passes through various chemical compounds and turns it into the asphalt. According to rough estimates, there are about 10 million tons of hot material inside this place. Theoretically, no life can exist in such conditions, but scientists have discovered a colony of microbes. Somehow, these creatures have learned to survive here. This also suggests that life outside of our planet may exist. The largest moon of Saturn, Titan, has many hydrocarbon lakes on the surface. And if the simplest forms of life appeared among 1 million tons of molten asphalt here on Earth, then nothing prevents them from appearing on Titan. We're going to Indonesia, to the island of Java. You need to climb a large volcano to see the next phenomenon. The volcano is overgrown with grass and trees, but it doesn't seem to be sleeping. Smoke is pouring out of its mouth. You climb to the top and see a clear lake instead of boiling magma. The blue sky is reflected in its bright turquoise surface. But don't try to jump there. This lake is filled with acid. The magma inside volcanoes comes from the deep bowels of the Earth's crust. The incandescent liquid consists of many molten metals and chemical compounds, and the lake is filled with particles of these metals. In addition, the volcano emits sulfur dioxide gases. When they combine with metals, they form a beautiful turquoise color. You'd better come back here at night. In some places, a lot of sulfur is concentrated. These accumulations come out of the lake and come into contact with the air. When this happens, everything around bursts into bright blue flame. It's safe to observe this from the side, but don't get too close. Nearby, on this island, there's another acid lake. It also releases sulfurous gases into the air, which are easily ignited when in contact with oxygen. And when this happens, the gases burst into a bright blue electric flame. It's difficult to see the flames during the day. At night, you can see these flashes from afar. Our next location is Australia. You start the drone high above the forest area. Among the green dense forests, you can see a bright pink spot. It's our lake. This time, the beautiful pink color may not stop you from swimming. You can relax here and take beautiful photos. The lake attracts thousands of tourists, but scientists have only recently been able to find out the reason for the unusual color. At the bottom of this salty lake in Melbourne, special algae grow and secrete a red pigment. In combination with sunlight, high temperatures, and a small amount of precipitation, it turns the lake pink. By the way, Australia is not the only place with such a phenomenon. There are lakes with a pink tinge of water all over the world. You can find them in Senegal, Bolivia, Kenya, and many other countries. The water of these places is also salty and contains the red pigment of unusual algae. We leave the hot beaches and fly to cold Canada. Here, we see a frozen Lake Abraham. We step on the ice and notice huge frozen bubbles inside. They resemble jellyfish, and there are thousands of them there. This is methane. It's a highly flammable substance. The grass, leaves, pieces of trees, and any organic substances that fall into the lake become food for a lot of bacteria that emit methane. Upon contact with frozen water, methane turns into tens of thousands of frozen balls. When the ice melts, the bubbles burst and sizzle. This phenomenon can also be observed on some shores of the Arctic Ocean. There, the size of the bubbles can reach several times more than balloons. It's a beautiful sight, but it's not safe since methane ignites when it contacts with air. We're in the coldest place of our journey. It's Antarctica, near the driest desert on Earth. A dry place doesn't mean it has to be hot. It's an area with minimum precipitation. The desert isn't sand and cacti, but a place where almost no living life inhabits. Some areas of Antarctica meet these two criteria. However, in this icy desert, you can notice a tiny lake. Its depth is only a few inches. Technically, it's a pond, but the most amazing thing is that it stays in a liquid form. The temperature here drops to -58 degrees Fahrenheit. The pond should be frozen, but this doesn't happen. Don Juan Pond is one of the saltiest reservoirs on the planet. The amount of salt here doesn't allow the water to freeze. Scientists have been studying this lake for more than 60 years, but they still can't find out the exact reason for the appearance of water here. No one expected such a strong storm. It's too dangerous to sail back to the land because of high waves and winds. But suddenly, you notice a small green island nearby. You and your friend are about 25 miles off the coast of Brazil. You were fishing and didn't notice black clouds obscuring the blue sky. You're approaching the unknown island and see a Coast Guard boat behind you. People from there are screaming something to you, but you can't make out the words because of the thunder. They tell us we should stay away from that island, your friend says. Despite the warning, you still sail since there's no other way out. Around the island, you notice sharp rocks sticking out of the water like knives in the dark. Now you realize what the Coast Guard warned about, but it's too late. Your boat hits a rock. The bottom is pierced. You start to sink. The rain and wind are getting stronger. Both of you fall overboard. Then darkness comes. You wake up in the morning because of the scorching sun and a dry mouth. Your friend and the wrecked boat are lying nearby. Apparently, you'll have to wait for rescuers to get out here. Now, in the light of day, you can see how dangerous the island's coast is. It's surrounded by rocks, and you're lucky you've survived. Getting out of here will be difficult. Together with your companion, you decide to look for coconuts and bananas. Your friend goes to the wreckage and pulls out a bag of medicine. Then, both of you leave the sandy beach and enter the dense jungle. A couple of steps later, you hear a strange hiss. You see your friend. His eyes are filled with horror. Goosebumps run down your back. You feel something alive crawling under your feet, and there's a lot of it. You look down and notice slithering snakes. There are dozens of them. They wrap around your legs, get into trees. They're everywhere. Don't move, your friend says. I think I know where we are. You want to ask him a question, but fear takes away your voice. He reads your face and answers the question. We're in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, the Brazilian Snake Island. These are not just some ordinary snakes. This is the golden lancehead, one of the most venomous reptiles in the world. You can find them nowhere else on the planet except for this land. They evolved here naturally, without other snake species intervention. That made their venom 5 times stronger than the venom of ordinary vipers. They're practically the only owners of this island. Nowhere else in the world will you find such a concentration of creeping reptiles on such a small piece of land. And now, they're glad that 2 big lunch meals have arrived. There's little chance of survival, but you're gonna try. The first thing you need to do is get out of your stupor and find a thick stick. This is your best tool right now. If you encounter a venomous snake, the best you can do is retreat slowly. But this time, there are too many of them. They're aggressive and hungry. Together with your friend, you fight off the snakes with a stick. But there's more and more of them coming. One of them falls on your shoulder from a tree and bites your neck. The poison instantly enters your bloodstream and affects your muscles. It feels like your body is melting. It becomes difficult to move, and your neck swells. Your friend grabs you and carries you deep into the jungle. Here, among the trees, you notice an old lighthouse. Yeah, this building really stands out here. Once a year, the Coast Guard visits it. Your friend breaks down the door and puts you on the floor. You're afraid you won't be able to survive the bite. Fortunately, your friend is a doctor. He injects the necessary medicine and saves your life. You have a few minutes to rest before more danger arises. Your friend tells you that the unique snakes appeared here thousands of years ago. This island was part of Brazil for a long time. Then, massive floods separated it from the continent. This part of the land was cut off from the whole world, which helped the formation of a unique ecosystem inside. Vipers that lived here evolved into golden lanceheads. They quickly became the main masters of the island and destroyed all the other animals. But how did they manage to survive without food, cut off from the whole world? They did it thanks to nature and evolution. This island is a transit point for many birds. They stop here to rest during long flights. These birds become dinner for the snakes. Previously, a snake bite almost didn't harm the birds. They were frightened and flew away, leaving the snake without food. But over years of evolution, the island's owners have developed such a potent poison that one bite was enough for a bird to never take off again. There's also a legend that a pirate hid treasures here a long time ago. And, so that no one would ever find it, he brought snakes to guard his gold. Of course, there's no chest with coins here, but the island is attractive for modern pirates, even today. Golden lancehead snakes are an expensive commodity, so bad people often visit this place to hunt the reptiles. That's why the Coast Guard is always on duty around the island. People are forbidden to visit this place. And even if someone manages to get past the guards, they will have to face the rocks. Only biologists and scientists have permission to study the local fauna. A necessary condition for a visit is a doctor's presence in the team, so they can save people from the snake's poison. So we have pirates and hordes of poisonous snakes, but there's something else that makes the island even worse. At this moment, you hear rustling all over the building. Thousands of little paws are tapping on the walls and floor. You look around and see lots of giant cockroaches. Some of them are half the size of your palm. They crawl under your clothes. You and your friends scream in fear and run out of the lighthouse. Quickly, you reach the shore and fall into the water. It seems that not a single cockroach is left under your shirt. But that's not all. You hear a strange buzzing sound. You look around and see a dark cloud of flying beetles forming in the sky. It's locusts! Thousands of flying insects are heading in your direction. To avoid a collision, you dive under the water and wait for the cloud to pass by. You go up to the surface and move to the shore. Fortunately, there are almost no snakes here. You and your friend are afraid to approach the jungle and wait for several hours until rescuers arrive. You're nervously painting a pattern on the sand and make a promise that you'll never revisit this place. Finally, you see the lifeguard boat. You're trying to tell them you got here by accident. They believe you and evacuate you from the island. While you're sailing away, you think about what would happen if many poisonous snakes appeared in a village or a small town. It's difficult to imagine what kind of problems people would face. But in fact, there's no need to imagine anything. There is a place on the planet where locals live next to poisonous cobras, but it doesn't create any chaos. A human can live in peace and harmony with reptiles in that village. Welcome to Shetpal village in India. This place has a population of about 2,600, and it's located in the jungle. It's hot here. Locals are friendly and responsive. If you go into one of the houses, you'll see something that seems impossible. The king cobra, whose venom is one of the most dangerous in the world, calmly crawls around furniture and eats eggs and meat that people give. There's even a special corner for the reptile to relax from the scorching sun, drink water, and have a snack. People are happy about the cobra, as if it was a pet. In the village, cobras are everywhere. They come into houses and schools, crawl through the streets, and keep company during dinner. The locals consider them full-fledged residents. They adore them. The snakes are also used to people and don't see them as dangerous. The coolest thing is there has never been a tragic case in the village because of a poisonous bite. There's no other place in the world where cobras live in such harmony with people. It used to be one of the most prosperous ancient cities. It had features that were unthinkable for other locations during the Bronze Age, like water systems and intricate architecture. Yet somehow, it didn't become famous. What's even more mysterious is that at some point, it became abandoned. Mohenjo-daro was a thriving city during the Indus Valley civilization in the Bronze Age. It had a population of at least 40,000 people. It was close to Mesopotamia and Egypt in terms of social, cultural, and economic features. Despite this, it's lesser known than the more famous cities in these regions, like Babylon or Memphis. It was eventually abandoned by 1700 BCE, and the reason for its abandonment and the fate of its inhabitants remains unknown to this day. In 1911, archaeologists discovered the ancient city of Mohenjo-daro after hearing reports of some unusual buildings in the area. However, local Indian authorities dismissed them as not having any historical significance, and the site remained untouched for several more years. It wasn't until 1922 that a local specialist believed he had found a buried local monument at the site. This led to large-scale excavations and the eventual naming of Mohenjo-daro as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The remains uncovered showed us that Mohenjo-daro was an incredibly modern city for that time. It is considered the best preserved ruin of the Indus Valley. One of Mohenjo-daro's most impressive features was its advanced sanitation system. Unlike in Egypt and Mesopotamia, where such appliances were only for the rich, Mohenjo-daro had hidden toilets and covered drains throughout the city. Excavations have uncovered over 700 wells, as well as private baths and a large communal bath. Remarkably, even private homes had toilets, and waste was efficiently disposed of through a city-wide sewage system. The people of Mohenjo-daro were highly aware of their surroundings. As the city was located near the Indus River, they built a strong defense against floods by using clever drainage systems. Over the centuries, they produced beautifully crafted pottery, jewelry, figurines, and other items that were traded as far as Mesopotamia and present-day Oman. Archaeologists have observed the use of standardized building materials in this ancient city, even though they didn't have the necessary machines back in the day. Interestingly, all the bricks were nearly the same. This shows great attention to detail in the city's design, as using consistent bricks creates an elegant look in the spaces within the city. People living in this area used the Indus Valley script to communicate with each other. This mysterious alphabet might be the key to unlocking more secrets from Mohenjo-daro. It was a language that used symbols instead of letters and had over 400 signs. Problem is, we're still trying to figure it out. The mystery of what caused the end of the Indus civilization and Mohenjo-daro remains unsolved. Some archaeologists suggest that the Indus River might have changed its direction. This could have led to problems in cultivating food if there was suddenly too much water in the city. However, there is no evidence that flooding destroyed the area, or that it was completely abandoned at once. A change in the river's course couldn't have been enough for the entire Indus civilization to disappear. Mohenjo-daro isn't the only lost town from Eastern civilizations. Ross Island, for instance, was once known as the Paris of the East due to its stunning architecture and gardens. However, the island is now a shadow of its former self, with the buildings being largely overtaken by tree roots and vines. Located 1.8 miles off the coast of Port Blair, India, the small territory was initially used as a jail, but later became a luxurious resort for its administrators. After the complex was closed in 1937, an earthquake further damaged the island and it became uninhabitable. Today, the island is managed by the Indian government and attracts tourists interested in exploring abandoned towns. Another lost city tells the story of why Kolmanskop, a ghost town located in Namibia, is still home to remnants of German architecture. Once a luxury destination in the early 1900s, it was settled by German workers looking for diamonds. The city boasted amenities such as a ballroom, a hospital, and even a bowling alley. However, its popularity began to wane in the late 1910s when another diamond-rich location was discovered nearby. Most of the inhabitants left in search of better fortunes, leaving the buildings behind. The hot climate and low humidity have preserved the structures over time, and tourists can now visit this desert ghost town from the nearby town of Lüderitz. Hashima Island is a reminder of how nature reclaims its land when humans leave. It was famously featured in a James Bond movie due to its eerie atmosphere. The island was initially opened in 1881 for undersea coal mining, and the population of the island grew to a peak of 5,000 people in 1959. Unfortunately, the mines closed in the 1970s, and people began to slowly leave the island, resulting in complete abandonment in a period of 3 months. Now, the island is a popular tourist destination as visitors explore deserted homes, swimming pools, stores, and factories. The discovery of gold in a creek near Bannack, Montana in 1862 caused the population of the town to grow from a few hundred to thousands in a few short years. Unfortunately, this rapid expansion was followed by a sharp decline because more gold had been found in other areas nearby. As a result, Bannack was eventually made the first territorial capital of Montana, but only held the title for less than a year before being replaced by Virginia City. The state of Montana later acquired most of the land in 1954 and made it Bannack State Park. The ancient city of Petra, located in Jordan, was fascinating because it was half built, half carved into the rock and surrounded by mountains. It's a popular tourist destination these days, but at one point it was abandoned too. Many things led to its decline, like bad government and changes in how people traded. Natural disasters didn't help either. This city saw a lot of earthquakes ruining its constructions and damaging its water systems. Since people had no place to live, no water, and nothing to sell to make money, they eventually moved on to better locations. The city remained hidden for almost 500 years until it was rediscovered in the 1800s. Most of the tourists going to Santorini have no idea that the island is home to the remains of one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, the Thera eruption. This catastrophic event took place some 3,600 years ago. Akrotiri, one of the towns on the island at the time, was buried under the eruption. Unlike Pompeii, however, no traces of people and civilization were found, suggesting that people had enough time to flee the volcano before it blew up. Henry Ford, the renowned American industrialist, created the Ford Motor Company in 1903. In 1927, he began working on a grand project, Fordlandia. His goal was to construct a massive rubber plantation near the Tapajos River in Brazil to provide a steady supply of rubber for his car tires and hoses. His idea was to make the town a paradise, with swimming pools, golf courses, bungalows, and even weekly square dancing sessions. Unfortunately, the trees in the plantation soon became infected with leaf fungus, making the project a failure. Ford invested a whopping $20 million in this endeavor, yet it was unable to produce the necessary rubber. So Ford sold the land to the Brazilian government in 1945. The buildings that were built are still there, although they have been taken over by nature and are visited by tourists. Sky City is a residential area located in the Asian Hangzhou suburbs. It was built in 2007 and was intended to be a replica of Paris. The city even has its own Eiffel Tower, as well as copies of other iconic Parisian landmarks like the Opera Garnier and the Champs-Élysées. It also has luxurious villas and apartments, a man-made lake, gardens, and parks. Despite its grand plans, it's almost completely abandoned. Nobody wants to live here because it's really expensive. It is, however, a pretty nice location for locals to take pictures, in case they want to trick people into thinking that they just landed in the French capital.
The Amazon River, the boat, and dense jungle on both sides. All is silent. Only the engine is revving, and you look around nervously under the earnest gaze of the Peruvian guide. Suddenly, the man smiles and points ahead. This is it. You've finally arrived at Iquitos. The city is hidden deep within the Amazon rainforest. On one side, Iquitos is surrounded by water, and on the other lies thick, impenetrable rainforest as far as the eye can see, making this city extremely difficult to reach. First, you had to fly to Peru's capital, Lima, a vibrant coastal city. From there, you traveled by bus through Peru's vast jagged mountains before being plunged into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. 3 days into this bus journey, you reached a small town where the road suddenly stopped. At over 140 square miles, Iquitos is the largest continental city in the world that cannot be reached by road. You're still over 200 miles away from Iquitos, So from here, you take a boat ride along the hot, humid Amazon River before finally reaching the remote city 5 days after you left Lima. When you arrive in the city, you notice many of the houses are built on tall stilts. This is because, in the springtime, the river surrounding Iquitos swells up, submerging parts of the city in water. For this, Iquitos has been nicknamed the Venice of the Amazon. The stilted houses are tall enough to avoid the murky waters of the Amazon River. You hear loud buzzing coming from all around the city. It sounds like a gang of bikers have arrived. In reality, these are motocarrios. There are very few cars in Iquitos. Instead, they have motorcycles with small passenger cabins attached to them. There are around 45,000 of these things whizzing around Iquitos, making the city very noisy. Your trip to the most isolated places has just begun. So, you head to Norway and arrive in the capital city Oslo. Immediately, you hop on another plane. After a 3-hour flight, you land at the world's northernmost public airport, Longyearbyen. You step off the plane to see a small and colorful town enclosed by snow-topped mountains. There's no settlement further to the north than this. Longyearbyen translates to the Long Year Town, named after its American founder, coal miner John Longyear. You take a walk along the coast of the small town. The water is a beautiful crystal blue. You decide to dip your toe in to test it out. Ow! Bad idea. The average temperature of the water here is 32 degrees, making it ice cold. In the distance, you can make out a fuzzy white creature. It's a polar bear. In fact, it's a group of them. In Longyearbyen, polar bears famously outnumber humans. Around 3,000 of these animals populate the area compared to the human population of 2,300. Finally, the sun sets. You grab a blanket and sit back to take in the stunning view of the northern lights. Now, imagine you're walking in the scorching heat across Egypt's Great Sand Sea. You've been walking for miles, hours, days even, dreaming of water, greenery, and a place to rest, when suddenly you come across a small settlement with olive groves, palm trees, and even freshwater springs. This isn't a heat-induced mirage. It's the Siwa Oasis, an Egyptian city of 23,000 people and a miracle of nature. You travel here by flying to Egypt's capital, Cairo, and then embarking on a lengthy and desolate bus ride across the desert. When you finally spot some greenery amongst the sand, you have reached the Siwa Oasis. After refreshing yourself in the cool waters of the springs, you explore the city further and come across ancient ruins. This city has existed since 10,000 BCE, and many historical remnants can still be found there today. Amongst these ruins, you notice there are newer buildings. These are where the modern-day Siwi people live. You spend some time with the Siwi, a friendly and unique community of Egyptians. They tell you all about their city. The Siwa Oasis is located in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and due to its harsh climate, it's one of the most remote cities in the world. You notice how dry the air is and how scorching the sun feels. Reaching highs of 118 degrees Fahrenheit, this heat makes the Siwa Oasis a difficult place to live. It's time to travel to a more balanced climate. You head northeast and arrive in Russia's capital, Moscow. From there, you take a flight east again, traveling further and further across Russia until you're closer to Alaska than to Moscow. You've reached the city of Petropavlovsk, which translates to City of Peter and Paul. The first thing you see are giant mountains surrounding the city, cutting it off from the rest of the world. These mountains are in fact volcanoes. In this far eastern part of Russia, there are more than 300 volcanoes, including 29 active ones. These volcanoes stop any roads from reaching Petropavlovsk. The city depends on flights and boats to import supplies. You turn away from the volcanoes to stare out at the blue, shimmering ocean. The water looks nice, so you head down to the beach where a crowd of sea lions are sunbathing along the sand. Petropavlovsk is home to incredibly diverse wildlife. Just off the shore, you can see a whale fin poking out of the water. You explore the city's diverse landscape. You go to one of the city's ski resorts and spend the day on the slopes. Then you hike up a rocky path to the base of one of the city's many volcanoes. Finally, it's time to relax on a boat tour around the island to see the city's famous Three Brothers rock formation. Feeling inspired, you travel to another volcanic land, Chile's Easter Island. The island doesn't have a harbor and only one airline flies to the remote land, so you travel an entire day to Santiago, Chile. Then you climb aboard a small plane to fly to Easter Island. You walk among the high cliffs of the barren island and come across its famous monuments. These are giant, mysterious statues of human heads. They're called moai and were carved by the local people around 800 years ago. You inspect the earth beneath your feet. It looks and feels very dry. Easter Island consists of 3 ancient volcanoes. The volcanic soil makes it very difficult to grow crops or vegetation. Some of the city's trees were cleared hundreds of years ago to make way for the stone monuments, giving the island the empty look it has today. You embark on a boat ride 1,100 miles west from Easter Island. You reach a small green land floating in the Pacific Ocean. This is Pitcairn Island. You might recall that this place played a major role in the mutiny on the Bounty. You come down from the boat and begin your journey to reach Adamstown, the center of the island where its 43 inhabitants live. To reach Adamstown, you hike the Hill of Difficulty, a steep and rocky 200-foot climb to the top of the island. Now that you've finally made it here, you can explore the diverse and unique nature of the land. Pitcairn Island is home to the largest marine reserve in the world. You take a snorkeling trip and swim alongside all kinds of exotic fish. You explore vibrant coral reefs and even catch sight of a rare humpback whale. Dreaming of the great days of the old Wild West, you decide to travel to Supai, Arizona. To get to this Native American settlement and fragment of the past, you drive along America's famous Route 66. You stop, seemingly in the middle of nowhere with only desert land as far as the eye can see. Then you follow an 8-mile walking trail to reach Supai. You hike down into the Grand Canyon, almost 3,000 feet deep. You come across a stunning waterfall spilling over the cliffs of the canyon. This is Havasu Falls, a popular tourist spot famous for its vivid blue-green water. After a further mile's hike, you finally reach Supai. Over 200 members of the Havasupai Indian tribe reside in the small town. It's often referred to as the most remote town in the United States. To your left, you see several mules making their way across town with packages on their backs. Because no roads lead to this small settlement, mail is delivered by a mule train. Without it, it would take the average mail carrier a 16-hour hike to complete this route. You walk around the area and come across many more towering blue waterfalls. The untouched nature and great views of the Grand Canyon make the long hike worthwhile. After a beautiful sunset, nighttime falls, and there are no lights for miles. The land is lit up by the countless stars shining overhead. People in the U.S. consume around 100 acres of pizza every day, which is almost the size of Vatican City. Also, they drink 146 billion cups of coffee a year. Now, with that amount of coffee, you could fill an average-sized lake in approximately 10 years. But you couldn't fill Lake Superior because it has enough water to cover the whole U.S. with 1 foot of liquid. Now, people in the U.S. generally don't live in rural states like Wyoming, and because of that, more people live in New York than in 39 out of 50 states of the U.S. At the same time, Wyoming is the 10th largest state in the U.S. It's bigger than the U.K., but it's also the least populated state. You could drive through it for hours without seeing a single person. And because there's no strangers around, locals don't even lock their doors. Also, the whole state only has 2 escalators. Count them. Nestled within Wyoming's borders is iconic Yellowstone, the country's first national park. Now, living in Wyoming can be likened to playing a game on hard mode. It's one of the windiest and coldest states. The weather is genuinely wild, and it's not for everyone. There are also positive things about Wyoming, like its affordable stay and endless outdoor activities. It has a population of 576,000 people. That number of inhabitants could fill a small city. But everything you love about the outdoors can be found here, and that's why people choose this state. Vermont is the muddiest state in the U.S. It even has its own Loch Ness Monster. In the 17th century, European cartographer Samuel de Champlain reported seeing a 20-foot monster in Lake Champlain, named after him, that was as thick as a barrel and had a head like a horse. And since then, many more people have allegedly seen this creature. Vermont is an excellent state with tons of natural beauty. It's the perfect place for starting a farm. The state has a population of a little over 500,000 people. There are more folks in a few blocks in New York than the entire state of Vermont. It's a rural place, not ideal for building huge cities. But if you love farms and maple syrup, then Vermont is a haven for you. It produced over 2 million gallons of maple syrup in 2003. Vermont is also very cold, so people have invented snow golf. They would paint golf balls red and play in the winter on hard, icy snow. Now let's talk about the largest state in America, Alaska, the last frontier. This state is so big that it could fit 19 other states. But when it comes to population, Alaska could be doing a bit better. It has stunning natural beauty, like huge forests and lakes. At the same time, there's a lot of wildlife, which can sometimes be frustrating. Imagine sitting in your garden and getting visited by a grizzly bear or a wolf. Part of the problem is that the cities are too far apart. It's at least a 6-hour drive from one city to another. Still, if you love the outdoors, Alaska is the place for you. Plus, you get paid to live there. But there is a problem. As we all know, Alaska is not connected to the rest of the U.S., so most goods have to travel a long way, meaning everything is quite expensive there. And one of the biggest reasons people don't like living there is that it's freezing. You must shovel tons of snow just to get outside and do simple tasks. Around 700,000 people live in Alaska year-round. And if you ask them, they'll probably tell you that they like it there because there aren't many people around. When you think of South Dakota, the first thing that comes to mind is Mount Rushmore, and that is basically it. The state has a population of a little under 1 million and is practically empty. It has harsh weather and it's pretty far from everything. But the people of South Dakota are super friendly. If you go there, you'll feel welcome. Also, as with many other states, the beauty of nature might surprise you. North Dakota is similar to South Dakota, but a little more challenging than South Dakota. The state has tough winters, hot and humid summers, and no big cities. And if that wasn't enough, it also has a lot of floods. When people hear about this, they usually stay away, despite Dakota being a beautiful state. It has a population of 780,000 people, making it the 4th least populated state in the U.S. When settlers were moving there, only a tiny number of people remained in the end. Many moved to Canada, where farmland is better, thanks to better weather and more fertile soil. North Dakota has some unique benefits, like low cost of living and low unemployment rates. And if you are a nature lover, you won't be disappointed. It has 13 state parks and 3 national parks, all with fantastic scenery. Delaware is a small state with an even smaller population. The biggest city in Delaware is Wilmington, which has a population of 70,500 people. As for the whole state, it has around 1,031,890 people. It also has 2 million corporations, but no big cities. You may wonder about the reason. Well, they don't pay income taxes there, and those corporations are not actually located in Delaware, meaning that the local people there really don't benefit from them. The state is prone to storms. Philadelphia, which is close to Delaware, has fewer storms and is closer to major cities, so corporations simply move there. Most people who live in Delaware are retired. They don't need jobs, but love the fantastic beaches this state offers. Hey there, cowboy! We're going on a horse ride to the most beautiful state with teeming wildlife, which houses one of the best national parks, Glacier. Of course, I'm talking about Montana. This state has a little over 1 million people and is bigger than Japan in territory. But Japan has around 111 times more people than Montana. Why? Well, most people don't want to be cowboys. Generally speaking, people tend to like living in big cities, which Montana doesn't have. Plus, Montana has tough winters and expensive houses. And people don't like being cold. That's why Florida has so many people. Rhode Island has a population of a bit over 1 million, making it the 8th smallest state in the USA. Rhode Island is a small, flat coastal state. If you climb on a chair, you might see the whole state. Just kidding, you can't do that. By territory, it's the smallest state in the U.S., but it's densely packed with people. At the same time, the inhabitants of this state are gradually leaving it. The cost of living there is high, so they would rather go somewhere more affordable. Now let's say you're from Canada. In this case, if you accidentally teleported to Maine, you wouldn't even notice it, because the landscape would look almost the same. Maine has beautiful lakes, mountains, dense pine trees, and many moose. If you see one, stay away. Maine is truly a beautiful state, but it has a small population of around 1,300,000 people. Maine has terrible winters, so almost everyone lives near the coast or as far south as possible to escape crazy snowstorms that are common here. Because of this, 89% of Maine is covered with forests. This is one of the reasons why there aren't many industries here. Portland is the biggest and most beautiful city in this state, but only around 38% of the population lives in cities. Most inhabitants of the state are avid outdoor lovers. You'd be surprised to find out the life-changing discoveries a person can make just by browsing Google Maps. Like this guy, who found a suspicious crater and might have made a major scientific discovery. In 2024, Canadian Joël Lupoint was planning a casual camping trip in his homeland. He opened Google Earth and zoomed in Quebec's Côte Nord region. That's when he saw it, this unusual rounded structure. The measurement was impressive, 9.3 miles from one point to another, and there seemed to be a lake next to it. He was quick to print the screen and sent the image to a French geophysicist to see if he knew anything about it. Most times these images turn out to be nothing, or simply Google Earth watermarks. But he was surprised when he opened his email and saw the scientist's reply. The geophysicist said that, judging by the looks of the topography, Lupoint could have discovered a meteor impact area. Now, impact areas are really hard to identify. Since they've been around for millions of years, most of their shapes have been heavily changed by erosion. Scientists call these areas impact structures. They're usually circular or crater-like and are made up of deformed bedrock. It happens when a meteor falls into the surface of the Earth. Here's the thing. Since the crater has huge walls around it, these areas are usually mistaken for mountain ranges. That's what left the Canadian explorer confused. But the French geophysicist that analyzed the case gave him hope. That weird formation in Quebec had been classified as a type of volcanic formation. After Lupoint brought this subject back to the agenda, scientists had to dig a little deeper to find the truth. Until this recent discovery, scientists thought the area looked like that due to some volcanic formation. This is actually normal, since other things such as volcanism and sinkholes can be mistaken for impact craters. To verify, they asked for some samples of the site. This is a more reliable way to fact-check whether a meteor landed there or not. When the meteor hits the Earth, it brings different types of minerals from outer space. That's the wonderful thing about impact craters. They reveal a link between Earth and the outside universe. By now, scientists have cataloged most of the minerals that are native to our planet. When they're searching for an impact structure, they usually look for things such as tinnite and chemisite, which can only be found in meteors. The biggest known impact crater in the world is the Vredefort crater, located in South Africa. This big thing was formed some 4 billion years ago. The asteroid that made it is estimated to have been one of the largest ever to strike planet Earth. When the researchers got the results of the site back in Canada, they did confirm that it contained zircon, a mineral that tends to show areas of impact. There's no way to guarantee that Lupoint really found an impact crater, but scientists are organizing a research mission over to the area just to make sure. If it turns out that it really is an impact crater, that's pretty huge news, since the last discovery was made in 2013. Another one of these mesmerizing discoveries came from a 15-year-old boy. William Goddery was also a Canadian, and for some reason loved looking for long-lost Mayan cities. Different from the previous story, William had an intention and a research methodology. He had studied many books on Mayan civilizations. He believed that Mayans built their cities in relation to the stars in the sky. So he opened a book and mapped all the cities that have already been unearthed. And that's when he noticed something important. There is an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. He thought to himself, could this mean there is a lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? William Gattery is known to be a science genius and has even won an award for this constellation theory. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to search Google Earth for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. Advances in satellite tech have shed new light on long-lost Mayan cities such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. He had hopes, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency to verify what he had found. Since he had already won awards for his research, he had friends in high places, and that's when things got interesting. According to the images, there was a large square area on the border of Mexico and Belize that looked like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. William named the new city discovered as Mouth of Fire. However, his story was very much contested inside the archaeological community, and many Mayan experts worked to debunk William's findings. Experts say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Renowned anthropologists and astronomers said William's methodology was an act of creative imagination. Still, a 15-year-old teen almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. What about these tiny dots that appeared on images of Google Earth? These strange spotted circles were found in the middle of the Algerian desert. A YouTuber browsing on Google Earth found these circles and discovered that people had been debating over their origin for years. He thought they were a glitch from satellite images. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. They're far away from any town, road, or human activity, making it hard to understand if it was man-made or just a natural phenomenon. To settle this mystery, he interviewed the people who took Google Earth's pictures. He found out they were 100% true. The circles were there in real life. They appear in multiple pictures from multiple years. Now, at first, he guessed they were the result of oil activity. Algeria is a rich area for natural resources, so this made sense. To find out if the area is worth extracting, companies usually undertake seismic surveys. They're a way of analyzing the Earth's surface by sending shock waves into the ground. Depending on how these waves bounce back, you'll know what is located underground. There was another possibility. The Sahara is a very dry area of the planet. The average high temperatures in summer are over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. To survive there, people need to find ways of accessing water. So his second guess was that the circles were kind of ruin or leftover from ancient water wells. But when he talked to an expert, he found out they weren't ancient water wells. You can see some of these traditional constructions in other cities on Google Earth, and they look really different from the mysterious circles. He decided to travel over to Algeria to find out the truth. He drove 99 miles into the heart of the desert, and when he gets there, he sees it. A huge crater dug on the sand, surrounded by 12 smaller holes. It kind of looked like the ancestor of a modern clock. There, he found something he couldn't spot on Google Earth: thin metal wires. When the curious YouTuber and his teams started to dig in the sand, they found old dynamite and some sardine cans. Apparently, they were hiding the truth. The Sahara Circles, as they were famously called, were not the historical leftovers of seismic surveying. Back at the time when these circles were made, this technology didn't even exist, but they were sure related to oil exploration. The dynamite holes were an ancient method of oil searching, and the sardine cans, well, they were left by the workers who were exploring the region. Another Google Earth mystery solved.
These dark patches on Greenland's ice sheet aren't just any old stains. Every summer, the ice, which is usually bright white, turns murky gray in certain areas. This so-called dark zone was a huge mystery for a long time, until some studies discovered that this weird transformation was connected to the odd appearance of red, green, and brown-colored algae. The scariest part is that this algae bloom keeps growing. The dark zone is getting darker, and terrifying microbes might start appearing. Now, the rest of the world should be concerned. The Greenland ice sheet is like a massive ice blanket that covers around 80% of the island. It's so thick that it holds about 8% of the world's freshwater ice. For most of the year, the ice looks like a giant untouched white sheet stretching over the land. But when summer rolls around and temperatures start to rise, things begin to change. The ice melts, revealing rocky areas along the coast. And as you move further inland, that once smooth white ice becomes darker. This is the dark zone, and it covers an area of around 248 miles in length and 62 miles at its widest point. This weird phenomenon happens basically for two reasons. The first one is black carbon. Just like dust that builds up on your bookshelf, the ice in Greenland has the same issue. The wind carries a mix of dust and soot to this icy area. But unlike your bookshelf, you can't just wipe it off with a cloth. In Greenland's case, this dirty mix settles on the ice and sticks around for thousands of years. So, the dark zone is basically covered in a fine layer of dust that's built up over time. Back in 2014, researchers analyzed this dirty mix and found that the darker ice areas were filled with black carbon. This black carbon didn't just appear out of thin air. Well, actually, it sorta did. Scientists believe it mostly comes from smoke produced by wildfires in northern Canada and Alaska somewhere in the past. As you might guess, black carbon is black, which is why it makes the ice look darker. Now, the second big reason for the Greenland ice sheet's summer makeover has to do with those algae we mentioned earlier. We're mostly talking about two types of it: the Ancylonema alaskana and the Ancylonema nordenskjoldii. Both of them love cold water regions. During winter, they stay in a dormant state deep within the ice. But when spring comes, they start to slowly migrate to the surface. By the time summer hits, they're ready to bloom and soak up nearly 24 hours of sunlight each day for photosynthesis and growth. Normally, these algae are green, but when exposed to sunlight, they turn brown as a natural way to protect themselves from harmful ultraviolet rays. And this color change is also what makes the ice in Greenland look darker. So far, this has been normal behavior. What's really alarming is that these algae blooms are getting bigger and bigger every year. This happens because they thrive on phosphorus, a nutrient that's plentiful out there and comes from a mineral called hydroxylapatite. This mineral is found in a type of rock that breaks down into tiny dust particles, which are then blown across the ice by the wind. As the climate gets warmer, the rocks dry out more, and stronger winds carry more dust. More dust means more phosphorus, leading to more algae growth. See? It is a cycle, and it keeps getting worse every year. Studying this is crucial to understanding why the dark zone keeps getting bigger. From the year 2000 to 2012, its size increased by 12%. But you might be wondering, why should we care? After all, it's just ice getting darker, right? Well, not exactly. Think about how you can't stand wearing black clothes on a hot, sunny day. They soak up the heat and make you feel even hotter. That's because darker surfaces absorb more sunlight. The same thing happens to ice. Together, dust, black carbon, and algae blooms are responsible for about 70% of the variability in albedo on the Greenland ice sheet. Albedo is just a fancy word for how reflective a surface is. If you take two surfaces, one white and shiny and the other dark and rough, the white one will reflect a lot of light and heat, giving it a high albedo. The dark one, on the other hand, will absorb more light and heat, so it has a low albedo. During the summer, the Greenland ice sheet experiences a reduction in albedo. This means the ice absorbs more sunlight, and when ice absorbs more sunlight, it melts faster than it should. This is why understanding what's happening in the dark zone is so important. It helps predict how quickly the Greenland ice sheet is melting and how it can affect the rest of the world. Greenland's ice sheet is the second largest in the world, covering an area about the size of all the land in the United States east of the Mississippi River. And its huge mass of ice averages a thickness of 1.4 miles. Unfortunately, the ice loss has skyrocketed. Back in the 1990s, Greenland was losing about 25 billion tons of ice per year. Now, it's losing around 234 billion tons per year. That's nearly 10 times more ice melting away each year. According to NASA, if all of Greenland's ice sheet were to melt, it would increase global sea levels by about 24 feet. That could be catastrophic for coastal countries and cities around the world. The Netherlands could be submerged, the Bahamas could be almost completely wiped out, and many of the Philippines Islands would be at risk of disappearing. All of this may seem like a distant reality, and it is true that most scientists believe it would take several hundred or even thousands of years for the ice sheet to melt completely. But it is important to know that Greenland didn't always have this thick layer of ice. Very recently, researchers took a close look at some sediment from the bottom of a 2-mile deep ice core extracted from the center of Greenland. They found that the soil had traces of willowwood, insect parts, fungi, and even poppy seeds. So these fossils are the first direct evidence that Greenland's ice sheet melted away in the recent geological past, around 400,000 years ago. At that time, Greenland was home to a green tundra landscape with insects and plants. This discovery is both fascinating and scary because it shows that the ice sheet collapsed before and might be more fragile than scientists originally thought. There is another concern too. A recent research collected meltwater from different spots on the Greenland ice sheet and found that the water samples were packed with hundreds and thousands of microbes. The concern is that they could be released into the ocean in the future. And some studies already suggest that areas near where a lot of glacial meltwater flows have a higher risk of viruses jumping to new hosts, like from animals to humans. Even though experts believe the chance of a doomsday virus coming from the glaciers is very small, it's still not zero. The truth is, we don't know much about the thousands of microbial species living on the surface of the ice, and there is simply not enough data to fully understand how dangerous these organisms might be. All of this might sound concerning, but we shouldn't panic just yet. There's still a lot we don't understand about what is darkening the Greenland ice sheet. We still need more detailed measurements of the relative abundance of dust, algae, and black carbon, as well as a better understanding of how these potentially dangerous microbes could affect our lives. The more we learn, the better we can predict what's going to happen and how we can prepare for it. There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land. So they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings. And they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the canal zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
There's a mysterious island that appears and disappears like magic. Just like Schrödinger's cat, this Schrödinger's island exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Officially, it's called Sandy Island, and it once appeared in maps, but it was never there in real life. Australian scientists decided to solve the mystery once and for all by embarking on an adventure to find this elusive archipelago. But when they reached the coordinates, all they found was endless blue waves. It's like the island was playing a game of hide-and-seek with them. This story goes back to 1876. A whaling ship was crossing the area and reported an island. Whoever saw it said it was over 15 miles long north to south and around 3 miles wide, about the size of Manhattan, so not so tiny at all. But every time researchers went to visit the area, they found nothing. So in 1974, an official mission from New Caledonia declared that Sandy Island was simply not a thing and excluded it from all maps. People went on with their lives until they noticed that the island was appearing on Google Earth as a black blob. In 2012, another Australian expedition went out to check out the area to get some explanations. They had to write a eulogy for the long-lost island and explain what could have created this mess. For starters, mapping technology wasn't at its peak back in the 1900s. It was easy to get the coordinates wrong. Then there was the fact that the area is big on volcanic activities. It's likely that volcanic lava cooled down and created a raft of some kind. Let's say that the whaling ship went by, saw the volcanic raft, and thought it was land from a distance. But hey, it's just a guess. Humans have ventured far and wide across the globe, and it may have seemed at some point that we discovered each and every nook of our planet. But when Mount Liko popped up on Google Earth, scientists were overcome with excitement. This hidden gem in northern Mozambique is no ordinary rainforest. It's nestled inside a volcano. Determined to confirm the existence of this mysterious forest, experts assembled a team of top-notch scientists and specialists from around the world. The journey to Mount Liko was no walk in the park, with a daunting vertical rock climb standing between them and the forest. But after 6 years of planning and preparation, they were ready for the challenge. Once they got there, they saw it was even better than they imagined. The place was like a perfectly tended garden. The forest sounded unique and different from other rainforests. There were some insanely huge caterpillars that looked dangerous. And they even found ancient pots and evidence of an untouched human ecosystem. Ooh! Terra incognita means unknown land. And one of the largest unknown territories being uncovered today is the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheets. Below the snowy surface, there is an entirely new world of canyons, waterways, and lakes, which are now being mapped. One can't help but wonder, is there really liquid water below Antarctica's frozen surface? Yep. Water can exist without freezing due to pressure. The liquid water is the result of Earth's warm interior, and that's how we get things such as Lake Vostok. Now, you can't see it, but Lake Vostok is right here. Located in East Antarctica, it lies beneath 2.5 miles of thick ice. This huge lake is about 4,800 square miles. Humans could only discover it with the help of some top-notch technologies like seismic soundings and ice-penetrating radars. According to these scientists, it's likely that the lake has been there for up to 15 million years. Bhutan is on the map for, among other things, being the happiest country in all of Asia. But it kept a hidden gem for all these years, one of the world's tallest unclimbed mountains, Kunkar Pansum. Bhutan is enmeshed in the glorious Himalayan mountains. That's why the climbing community was beyond excited when they discovered an untouched mountain. Imagine being the first person to climb an unexplored peak. That would probably guarantee you a spot in the Guinness World Records for sure. The mountain has been untouched because of a Bhutanese law. For locals, the mountain peak is a sacred site, shrouded in mystery and legends. One of their beliefs is that the sacredness of climbing a mountain lies not in reaching its peak, but in truly communing with the mountain and enjoying the process. We got to admit, that is a bit of a newsflash for Westerners. If you're ever in the state of New York, make sure you check out the Aglo General Store. You'll have to drive somewhere around the Catskills to find a beautiful, grand, big nothing. Aglo is one of America's most famous paper towns, aka a fake town. But this case is different from Sandy Island. Aglo Town never existed, and it wasn't a mistake. You see, there's an old copyright practice amongst map makers. They add in paper towns so they can know when someone is simply copy-pasting their work. What they didn't expect is that this would get completely out of hand. Some say that one day a guy picked up a map at a gas station that had Aglo Town marked in it. The person decided to open a store over there and named it Aglo General Store. Some say the guy who opened this store faced a lawsuit from the map makers. Anyways, it only lasted enough years to become a national joke. Americans drove from all over the U.S. to get a picture of the town's fake welcome sign. And then we've got Bermeja Island, located in the Gulf of Mexico. This funky island appeared on many maps of the 16th and 17th centuries. It was probably drawn by Spanish explorers. Sure, the exact location varied from map to map, and its name sometimes appeared as Bermeja, but its existence was certain enough. The Bermeja Island was last seen in a 1921 Mexican map, and then, poof, it dropped out of the horizon altogether. People started talking and wondering, did the island sink? Was it destroyed? In 2009, 3 official investigations happened to search for the island. They used high-tech technologies to scour the Mexican seabed, but Bermeja was nowhere. Researchers had multiple guesses on what it could be. Let's delve on one of these ideas. The idea was probably made up by old-day explorers to mislead their enemies in search of land and gold. Well, that seems plausible. Now, let's take a look at Rio de Janeiro. Once, the city was filled with informal territories. These places are known as slums or favelas. They're like mini-cities inside the big city. Some favelas are known to be underprivileged territories, where dwellers don't get the same urban perks as other citizens, such as the sewage system and garbage pickups. These slums grew so quickly that the government didn't have time to keep track of their developments. So today, it's usually the dwellers themselves that name the streets and make do with whatever they have at their disposal. One of the biggest slums in Brazil is located in Rio de Janeiro, the so-called Hacienda, and it was only recognized as a neighborhood by the local government in the 1990s. Our own ocean floor is less mapped than Venus, Mars, and the Moon. In fact, 95% of our oceans are unexplored. Strange, right? We do have the available technology, which is mainly sonar soundings, sending wave sounds to the ocean bed and registering what they hear back. One of the main advantages of mapping the seabed more thoroughly would be to get more insight to marine hazards such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Plus, there are so many unidentified marine life. This could give us a great insight into preservation and discovering the true dynamics of our marine ecosystems.